Lily, can you get me some water? Chloe managed to force her eyes open. She had been running a fever all night, and her throat felt bone dry. Of course, Mrs. Vance, the maid, who had been keeping vigil by her bedside, replied instantly. She got up and hurried out, returning a few minutes later with a glass of warm water. After drinking the water, Chloe felt a bit more human. She looked up at Lily. Is Julian back? Lily shook her head, her expression carrying the resigned look of someone completely used to this routine. As expected, Chloe thought. Today was their second wedding anniversary, and just like before, he couldn't care less. Remembering something, Lily quickly added, "Ma'am, Mr. Vance had a valid reason for not coming home last night. I overheard the butler mentioning that he had a major live television interview to attend today." Chloe offered a faint, tired smile. The reason didn't even matter anymore. He had always been this way, and she had long since gotten numb to it. Lily, go ahead and prepare some oatmeal and a few light sides for me. I'm starving. Having skipped her last 2 meals, her stomach felt completely empty. Lily nodded quickly and hurried downstairs. Chloe dragged herself out of bed. After freshening up, she applied a layer of light makeup. Her features were naturally stunning, especially her eyes, which were as clear and bright as a star-filled sky. However, the lingering flu added a fragile, pale tint to her usually elegant and radiant face. By the time Chloe went downstairs, the table was already set with food, and she took her seat immediately. Just then, Victoria Vance walked in from the front door. She was a woman of absolute elegance and grace, her face radiating a gentle warmth. In her hands, she carried a bowl of a premium collagen wellness tonic, which she placed softly in front of Chloe. "Chloe, sweetie, are you feeling any better?" Victoria was Julian's stepmother, but she was the only mother-in-law Chloe knew. When Julian was just 5 years old, his biological mother had passed away from an illness, and his father had remarried shortly after. "Much better, thank you, Mom." Victoria was deeply fond of Chloe as a daughter-in-law. Chloe was sophisticated, knew how to carry herself in high society, possessed breathtaking beauty, and possessed a rare, high-born grace. Finding someone so perfect for a prominent family like the Vances was next to impossible. Seeing that Chloe actually had a decent appetite, Victoria asked tentatively, "Chloe, I heard Julian isn't coming home today." Chloe set her spoon down, forcing a tight smile. "It's fine, Mom. I'm used to it." Victoria sighed softly, her heart aching for her. "Oh, Chloe, you've really been wronged. Julian has truly gone too far. He hasn't set foot in this house for 2 months." Though Victoria knew her stepson's behavior was atrocious, her status as a stepmother gave her very little leverage or authority over him. All she could do was complain behind his back. Remembering the time, Victoria stood up, walked over to the living room, and turned on the television. "Chloe, I heard Julian's interview is today." She glanced at her luxury watch. The timing should be just about right. Feeling physically drained, Chloe finished her oatmeal and began sipping the wellness tonic. A few minutes later, a tall, strikingly handsome man appeared on the screen. He sat with his legs crossed, leaning back lazily against the studio sofa. His bespoke, tailored suit perfectly accentuated his powerful, athletic build. Chloe stared at the man on the screen. His features were sharp and deep-set, his eyes cold and piercing. Beneath his high-bridged nose, his lips curled into a faint, aloof smirk. The interview officially began. The host started with standard questions about corporate strategy and business models. Julian answered with effortless composure. When the topic shifted to industry foresight, his responses remained sharp and flawless. Chloe had zero interest in corporate talk and was just about to stand up and leave when the host threw out the final question. "Mr. Vance, some of your followers are quite curious. It's noted that in the 2 years since your marriage, you have never attended a single public event with your wife. They want to know, is your married life happy?" The moment the question was uttered, anticipation filled the room. Chloe froze mid-motion. Victoria tensed up as well. On the screen, Julian's dark eyes abruptly turned icy. A mocking, cynical smile spread across his handsome face. Do you really think a marriage born out of a calculated trap could ever be happy? A calculated trap? The host was visibly blindsided by the raw response, momentarily losing his words. Meanwhile, the live audience and online viewers erupted into absolute chaos. A trap? Does that mean there was a dark secret behind Mr. Vance's sudden marriage 2 years ago? They say the ultra-wealthy are masters of calculation. Good Lord, even CEO Vance couldn't escape it. The Vance family treats that adopted daughter of theirs incredibly well. Why would she scheme against Julian? Oh, come on, it's simple. She obviously realized that marrying anyone else wouldn't give her the elite status of being Mrs. Vance. So she used her proximity to get the prize. The live stream chat was scrolling at a frantic, toxic speed. Victoria frantically grabbed the remote and shut off the screen. She turned to Chloe, her voice trembling slightly. Chloe, sweetie, don't overthink this. Julian, he might just, maybe. Victoria knew Julian had always been cold to Chloe, but she never imagined he would weaponize a public platform to say something so profoundly damaging. Chloe's body went rigid, her entire being plunging into a bottomless ice pit. A calculated trap? What did that even mean? Back then, he was the one who had publicly proposed to her. Why was he now rewriting history, calling it a trap? Granted, she was just the adopted daughter of the Vance family, but she had been deeply cherished by the old patriarch, Grandpa Vance. 2 years ago, when Grandpa Vance was on his deathbed, Julian had staged a high-profile, grand proposal right in front of the media. Chloe had secretly loved Julian for years. Believing he returned her feelings, she had blissfully accepted. She never could have anticipated this. The years of suppressed grievances and silent heartbreaks suddenly rushed to the surface. Chloe pressed her fingernails deep into her palms. Ever since their wedding night, Julian had never shown her a shred of affection. Instead, he ignored her, froze her out, and let her become the laughingstock of their elite social circle. Chloe loved Julian, yes, but over the last 2 years, that profound love had been completely shattered by his relentless cruelty. Tears welled up in her eyes. Chloe stood up from the dining table. Mom, I'm full. I'm going to go upstairs now. Her tone was flat, completely devoid of any audible emotion. Victoria knew how deeply wronged her daughter-in-law was. Her throat tightened with choked sympathy. Chloe, you're still sick. Go upstairs and get some rest. I'll have the kitchen simmer some chicken broth for you for lunch. Chloe squeezed her hands together, a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Mom. Back in the master bedroom, Chloe surveyed the space. The room was massive, yet from the day they married until now, she had occupied it entirely alone. Countless nights, she had awoken gasping from nightmares, only to open her eyes to absolute, hollow solitude. When she fell ill in the dead of night, there was still no one but her solitary shadow. Recalling the sheer volume of humiliation she had endured over the past 2 years, regret finally consumed her. She regretted marrying Julian. She regretted marrying this heartless, unapproachable man. The one thing she had wanted most in this life was a warm, loving home. He had handed her hope, only to plunge her into absolute despair. Though Chloe couldn't fathom why Julian would publicly claim he was trapped, one thing was absolutely undeniable. Julian had never possessed a single ounce of affection for her from the very beginning. Chloe slowly closed her eyes, a tear escaping the corner of her eye and tracing a silent path down her cheek. She refused to stay in a marriage completely devoid of love. After a long silence, Chloe picked up her phone and pulled up that number, a number that felt both deeply foreign and painfully familiar. The call connected. She didn't hesitate. Let's get a divorce. There was no response from the other end. After a beat of heavy silence, the line went dead. Chloe's face turned completely expressionless. 2 years. He was still this cold, so cold that she felt like she barely recognized the boy she grew up with. Staring at the silver-framed wedding photo sitting on the nightstand, Chloe turned it face down on the surface. She opened her handbag, pulled out a heavy ring of keys, and knelt down to open the built-in safe. Inside were all the assets Grandpa Vance had left solely to her, priceless high jewelry, rare artwork, and deeds. But what she was looking for was the gift her grandfather had given her for her 18th birthday, the keys to a luxury high-rise apartment in the heart of the city center. Holding the keys, the corners of Chloe's eyes tilted slightly upward. At the very least, after leaving the Vance estate, she still had a sanctuary to call her own. Knock, knock, knock. A soft, hesitant tapping came from the door. "Chloe, sweetie, can I come in?" Victoria's voice drifted inside. The morning's broadcast had left Victoria deeply unsettled. After pacing back and forth, she had decided to come up and try to comfort her daughter-in-law. Chloe quickly slipped the keys into her bag and walked over to open the door. "Chloe, how about I take you shopping this afternoon?" Victoria offered gently. "Whatever catches your eye, we'll have it shipped right to the house, okay?" Victoria didn't know the right words to heal the wound, but as a woman, she knew that retail therapy was a universal distraction. Looking at her mother-in-law's anxious, caring eyes, Chloe understood the kindness behind the gesture. But since she had already demanded a divorce from Julian, she had no intention of staying in this house a moment longer. "Mom, thank you. Thank you for taking such good care of me all these years." Victoria jolted slightly. The words sounded dangerously like a final farewell. But she chose not to press, squeezing Chloe's hand tightly as she tried to maintain the conversation. "Chloe, I notice you barely buy new clothes these days. Tell you what, I'll have Lily tag along, and you can shop until your heart's content." Chloe stepped closer to Victoria, taking the older woman's hands and cradling them in her own palms. "Mom, there's something I don't want to hide from you. I just called Julian and asked for a divorce. I'm moving out today." "Divorce?" Victoria froze entirely. Her hands turned icy, and her knees felt suddenly weak. Before Grandpa Vance passed away, he had explicitly pulled her aside and charged her with ensuring Chloe was well looked after. Chloe had no powerful biological family to lean on, so when she married into the family, Grandpa Vance had ensured she received the highest degree of respect and security. Victoria had always kept that debt of gratitude close to her heart. "Chloe, Julian went entirely over the line this time. But please don't act rashly. Once your father gets back from his business trip, I promise I will make him discipline Julian properly." Chloe's throat tightened. Even though Julian was cold-blooded, the rest of the Vance family had treated her with genuine affection. Her father-in-law and mother-in-law had practically treated her better than a biological daughter. But she truly could not survive another day in a hollow, loveless marriage. "Mom, there's no need. Dad carries an immense burden with the company, and your joints have been flaring up lately. You shouldn't have to stress over my life. Julian and we were bound to reach this point sooner or later." Hearing the absolute finality in Chloe's voice, Victoria's heart sank to rock bottom. Yet, reflecting on how Julian had treated Chloe over the past 2 years, she found she couldn't bring herself to utter any empty words of persuasion. "Chloe, divorce is a massive step. Can we at least wait until your father returns?" She attempted to buy some time, hoping there might still be a turning point. Chloe wrapped her arms around her in a warm hug. "Mom, it's okay. This is my life, and I can handle it." Victoria finally broke down, turning her face away to brush away the tears streaming down her face. Chloe gently led her over to the sofa, guiding her to sit down. "Mom, please don't be sad. I'll come back to visit you and Dad whenever I can. You two will always be my family." Victoria nodded through her sorrow, choked up. Then a thought struck her, and she asked, "Chloe, if you move out, where are you going to stay?" "I have a few luxury condos under my name. Look through them and pick whichever one you like. I'll have the deed transferred to you immediately." "Thank you, Mom, but I already have a place to stay." Chloe pulled the ring of keys from her bag. "Did you forget? Grandpa gave me a penthouse apartment for my 18th birthday." Victoria nodded slowly, memory sparking. "Right? I remember now. Well, whatever you lack, just tell me. I'll have it bought and delivered." That was the absolute least she could do for Chloe now. Chloe hugged Victoria tightly, so moved that words failed her. After a quiet lunch, Chloe packed a few boxes of her personal belongings. Lily and the family driver carried the luggage down to the car, both of them blinking back tears. Victoria held Chloe's hand, offering endless, reluctant instructions before finally letting go after half an hour. As the driver slowly navigated the car down the estate's driveway, Chloe's tears finally spilled over against her will. When they arrived at the high-rise, the driver helped carry her belongings up to the unit. "Mrs. Vance, you have my number. If you ever need a car, please don't hesitate to call me anytime." Chloe thanked him softly. Once the driver left, she began unpacking. A luxury residence of this caliber was maintained by a professional cleaning service year-round, so it was pristine. The three-bedroom layout featured a beautiful, Zen-inspired modern minimalist aesthetic, furnished with top-tier designer pieces. Chloe essentially only needed her suitcase to move in. The apartment featured a built-in heavy safe, into which she carefully transferred all the treasures Grandpa Vance had secured for her. Just as she finished organizing, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and pressed answer. Instantly, a piercing, high-volume voice blasted through the speaker. "My sweet Chloe, do me a favor and open the entertainment news right now. What kind of psychotic episode is that absolute dog of a husband of yours having today?" The voice belonged to Harper Lowe, Chloe's college classmate and absolute best friend. "Where are you right now?" Chloe asked, her tone steady and unhurried. "I'm on set shooting a scene. I won't be back in the city center until late this afternoon." Harper was a cliched actress, blessed with a gorgeous figure and a stunning face, but completely lacking a breakout hit. Though her family was incredibly wealthy, she insisted on working hard, yet every project she touched seemed to tank. In her own words, it was pure bad luck. Despite that, she kept getting cast, not because of her family connections, but because the rate she demanded was so laughably low it practically disrupted the industry market. "I need to tell you something. I asked Julian for a divorce." Chloe walked over to wash her hands, setting the phone on speaker on the counter. "What? A divorce? You asked Julian for a divorce?" The voice on the other end was practically a roar, followed by a torrent of ecstatic shouting. "Ha ha. Yes. Oh my God, Chloe, you finally woke up. I told you years ago that that piece of work wasn't worth it, but you wouldn't listen. And now? That bastard actually had the nerve to claim in front of millions that he was trapped. Trapped my ass." Harper was practically spitting fire through the line. Chloe poured herself a glass of water and swallowed her final dose of cold medicine. "Harper, let's talk later. I've caught a flu and I really need to sleep." "A flu? Is it serious? How about I swing by the Vance estate the second I wrap up? It's not like that deadbeat husband of yours is ever there anyway." Only then did Chloe realize she hadn't informed her best friend about the move. "Harper, I've actually moved out of the estate. I'm currently staying at the apartment Grandpa gave me." Harper's interest peaked instantly, and the sound of her tossing her bag of chips aside echoed through the phone. "Send me the address right now. I'll come over the second I'm free." Chloe hadn't seen her best friend in quite a while, so she opened WeChat and dropped her a pin. After hanging up, Chloe curled beneath the duvet. Lying on the bed and staring up at the ceiling, a faint, involuntary smile touched her lips. For the first time in 2 years, she felt an overwhelming sense of profound relief. When she was just the adopted daughter of the Vance family, she had constantly strained to be flawless, her nerves never loosening for a fraction of a second. After marriage, the mantle of being Mrs. Vance demanded even tighter perfection. After all, the media monitored her every move, and a single misstep would land her on the front-page tabloids. But from this day forward, none of that mattered. She could live freely, dress casually, and skip the exhausting high society social luncheons and hypocritical cocktail parties. As her thoughts drifted, she drifted into a deep, peaceful slumber. She was right in the middle of a wonderful sleep when the apartment buzzer rang. Chloe sat up groggily, throwing a cardigan over her shoulders before walking to the door. Unfamiliar with the building's layout, she checked the video monitor first for safety. On the screen, a woman stood in the hallway wearing a black silk headscarf, oversized sunglasses, and a heavy face mask, all paired with a long-sleeved floral maxi dress. She was looking around in a highly suspicious, cloak-and-dagger manner. Chloe sighed. In the dead of summer, it was a miracle the girl hadn't passed out from heat stroke. The moment the door swung open, the woman lowered her sunglasses slightly, glanced around, and bolted inside while hoisting her skirt. Thank God, thank God. No paparazzi followed me. Chloe eyed her up and down. Seeing the sweat beads rolling down her face, she pulled a chilled soda from the fridge and handed it over. If you die of heat stroke, does that count as a workplace injury? Harper grabbed a throw pillow and hurled it at her. You heartless girl. Who do you think I went through all this drama for? It was to see you. She snatched the soda and began stripping off her tactical disguise layer by layer, finally revealing a sweet, incredibly cute, and perfectly sculpted round face. Even if it's to see me, you don't have to dress like a black market smuggler, Chloe remarked, shifting to sit cross-legged on the sofa. What do you know? Harper took 2 massive gulps of the soda. The role I just landed in this production is a highly critical supporting character. The director explicitly instructed us to avoid letting the paparazzi capture our faces in public. A highly critical supporting character? How critical are we talking? Chloe asked, examining her with genuine curiosity. Harper finished the soda and tossed the bottle into the recycling bin. I play the female lead's personal, ready-ordy handmaiden. Chloe pressed a hand to her forehead, practically gasping for air. Harper had been acting for years, yet she still couldn't tell the difference between a core character and an extra. The fact that she took the role anyway proved that this billionaire's daughter was completely unfussy about her gigs. All right, enough about me, Harper said, leaning in. Tell me everything, Chloe. How did the talk with that coal-faced future ex-husband of yours go? Chloe curled her lips slightly. I only stated that I wanted a divorce. We haven't officially signed the paperwork or filed. Harper let out a sound of pure disdain. Is there even a difference between having that certificate and not having it with an iceberg like him? Do you honestly think his attitude toward you has any room left to drop? Chloe wanted to laugh, realizing her friend made a valid point. Fine, no difference. He is officially my cold-faced future ex-husband. Her slightly heavy mood had lifted significantly upon seeing her best friend. So give me the details. I want the tea. Harper urged, using her silk scarf to tie her voluminous curls up into a high ponytail. Chloe had no choice but to recount the brief phone call. And? That's it? That's the whole story. Harper's eyes went wide with shock, as if she had just heard something catastrophic. You said one sentence about divorce, and he just hung up without a word? Chloe nodded, entirely unbothered. Because that's exactly how we've always communicated. As long as the notification is delivered, the job is done. But he didn't state his position. What if he refuses to sign? Harper bolted upright from the sofa, her eyebrows knitting together in pure anxiety. He won't refuse, Chloe said, getting up to brew a cup of chamomile tea for her friend to calm her nerves. That man loathes being calculated against more than anything. If he truly believes what he said on TV, he should be absolutely thrilled that I'm initiating the split. Harper sank back into the sofa, her fingers flying across her phone screen as she scrolled aggressively. What are you looking for? Chloe asked, curious. Without looking up, Harper answered, I'm checking to see if that iceberg husband of yours has launched into another public psychotic episode since you dropped the D word. The sky was beginning to darken. Unsure of Harper's filming schedule, Chloe checked, Harper, it's getting late. Are you heading back to your place, or? Harper quickly dialed a number, spoke for a brief second, hung up, and waved her phone triumphantly. I'm staying with you tonight. Chloe didn't want to mistreat her guest, but having just moved in that afternoon, she hadn't had time to stock the kitchen. Should we go out for dinner? She suggested tentatively. Harper shook her head violently. Absolutely not. I cannot compromise my coordinates. Getting photographed by paparazzi right now would be fatal. Chloe smiled inwardly at her friend's extreme professionalism. Fine, I'll order delivery. What are you craving? Harper practically bounced over to her side. Chloe, sweetie, you have no idea how brutal filming has been. My manager hovers over me like a hawk every single day. I haven't had a single full meal in weeks. Chloe stared at her in utter disbelief. 2 days ago on FaceTime, I literally saw you demolishing a hot pot feast. How are you? Chloe tossed her phone to her. "Order whatever you want. I won't tell your manager." Harper snatched the phone, instantly opening the app and adding items like a madwoman. Chloe pressed her palm to her forehead, wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake. 40 minutes later, the apartment buzzer rang. Though she assumed it was the delivery driver, Chloe remained cautious and verified via the monitor. Yes, it was the food. When she saw the mountain of burgers, fries, and spicy lamb skewers covering the table, Chloe's brows knit tightly together. This meal alone is going to add 5 pounds. She distinctly recalled their last dinner together. Her friend had overeaten so severely that she gained nearly 3 pounds by the next morning. Her manager had forced her to run 6 miles straight, and Harper had nearly fainted on the track. The lesson had been forgotten remarkably fast. Before Chloe could lecture her on the consequences, Harper was already tearing into a spicy chicken sandwich. Chloe went silent, but seeing how genuinely happy her friend looked while eating, she swallowed her words of warning. Harper chewed happily. "Chloe, what's your next move?" Chloe understood the underlying question. "I haven't thought that far ahead yet." Before this, she truly believed she would spend the rest of her life within the Vance estate, so she had never planned a personal future. Her sole focus had been executing the duties of Mrs. Vance flawlessly. "Fair enough. But with your capability, whatever you choose to do, you're going to crush it," Harper said, wiping her hands. "I still remember back in college, you swept every academic award in our major. My parents used to nag me every single day to copy you. Then you went ahead and got married young, and my family finally left me alone. Looking at it that way, I guess I actually owe that iceberg a thank you note." Chloe offered a quiet smile, sliding the plate of lamb skewers closer to her. "Consider these compensation for your childhood trauma." Harper turned her head, nearly choking on a laugh. After eating their fill, the two girls collapsed flat onto the sofa to digest. "Chloe, if, and I mean if, Julian refuses to grant the divorce, what's the plan?" Harper asked. As the heiress of the Low Group, she was well aware that high society marriages were never simple. They were heavily bound by corporate interests. Her own parents were a prime example, a classic arranged corporate alliance with zero affection, yet forced to stay together and play the deeply devoted couple in public because too much capital was tied up between them. "When you say he might refuse, are you referring to the financial fallout?" Chloe guessed her friend's train of thought. After all, she and Julian had never signed a prenuptial agreement. If they divorced, she was legally entitled to half of his staggering net worth. Harper nodded like a bobblehead. "No one understands me like my Chloe." "The divorce is my choice," Chloe stated calmly. "Even though we don't have a prenup, I am not taking a single dime of his money." She possessed no feelings for him, so keeping his wealth carried zero meaning. Doing so would only validate the public whisperings that her marriage had been a calculated financial play from the start. Harper reached out and tapped her forehead gently. "Why on earth would you leave it? I know exactly how he treated you these past 2 years. He was the one in the wrong. If it were me, I would have burned the Vance family estate to the ground by now." Chloe didn't argue further. She simply got up, fetched a soft throw blanket from the bedroom, and draped it over her friend. Meanwhile, a limited edition Maybach slowly rolled down the driveway of the Vance family estate. The car came to a stop and a tall, imposing man stepped out. "Welcome home, Mr. Vance," the butler, Thomas, hurried out to greet him. Julian offered a brief, low grunt of acknowledgement and walked straight into the villa. Inside, Victoria was dining alone. Seeing Julian walk in, she immediately stood up. "Julian, you're back." Julian completely ignored her, heading straight up to the second floor. Victoria wanted to say something, but Julian moved with such rapid, purposeful strides that he vanished from sight within seconds. She had no choice but to sit back down and continue her dinner. A few minutes later, Julian came downstairs holding a heavy manila document envelope. "Julian, have you eaten yet?" As a stepmother, Victoria had always been meticulously dutiful. Even though Julian had treated her with cold detachment since childhood, she had always extended the care due to a son. Julian glanced briefly toward the dining table, his tone conversational. Where is she? Victoria knew precisely who she was. Chloe. Chloe is. She wanted to explain that Chloe had moved out, but she feared that revealing it would only fracture their relationship further, leaving absolutely no room for reconciliation. Martha, the head housekeeper, didn't give her the chance. Julian called Martha out from the kitchen. Having been with the Vance family for decades, Martha was one of the few staff members Julian actually trusted. Wiping her hands on her apron, Martha walked out, her frame trembling slightly under his intense gaze. Where is she? Julian's eyes were cold, sending a distinct chill down the housekeeper's spine. Mrs. Vance. Mrs. Vance moved out this afternoon, sir. Martha didn't dare lie to the young master. After all, she was an employee. If she offended him and got fired, she would lose her livelihood. Julian's dark brows snapped together instantly, a layer of menacing frost covering his handsome face. Without another word or question, he turned on his heel and walked out the front door. Before anyone inside could even process what had happened, the taillights of the Maybach had already vanished into the night. Midnight. The Eclipse Lounge. Julian, what took you so long? The speaker was Luke Lynn, Julian's childhood best friend and the youngest heir to the Lynn conglomerate. He was handsome, marked only by a faint, light scar near his hairline, a souvenir from a childhood tumble down a flight of stairs. I had to stop by the estate, Julian muttered, sitting down and draining the glass of liquor that had been pre-poured for him in a single gulp. Hey, slow down there, his other friend, Dominic Tang, warned, subtly sliding the crystal decanter out of reach to prevent Julian from repeating the blackout episode from a few months prior. Dominic was the crown prince of the Tang corporate empire, strikingly handsome with a deep, suntanned complexion that made him appear far more grounded and mature than his actual age. Julian shot him a sharp look, sliding the glass right back in front of himself. Dominic exchanged a meaningful look with Luke. Luke shifted closer to Julian's side on the leather booth. Julian, we saw your broadcast interview this morning. But… Luke paused, hesitating mid-sentence. But what? Julian looked at him, his face entirely unreadable. Dominic quickly took over the conversation. But we both think your response to that final question went entirely over the line. Julian let out a cold, cynical chuckle, pouring himself another full glass. And how exactly do you think I should have answered? Claimed that my marriage is absolute domestic bliss. Luke and Dominic exchanged a glance. That's not what we mean. It's just, certain realities are better kept behind closed doors. You aren't just an ordinary guy, Julian. You're the executive vice president of the Vance Group and the sole heir to the entire legacy. Julian remained entirely indifferent. A fact is a fact. Whether I voice it or not changes nothing. He drained the second glass. Luke joined him, pouring a shot for himself. So, when you went back to the estate tonight, what did Chloe say about it? Dominic looked over, a trace of worry in his eyes. Julian set his glass down, leaning back lazily against the plush velvet cushions of the private booth. She moved out. She moved out. Luke's voice spiked with sheer disbelief. In his mind, Chloe was the definition of rational, poised, and deeply aware of high society optics. Today's broadcast had already triggered a wave of negative PR for the Vance family. Logically, Chloe should have maintained the front to mitigate the damage. Moving out now was essentially pouring gasoline on a corporate fire. How could you just let her walk away? The media is already spinning narratives. If a tabloid snaps a photo of her leaving the estate, God knows what kind of scandal they'll manufacture. Dominic agreed with Luke's assessment. Julian crossed his legs, loosening his collar with a careless flick of his fingers. She won't last more than a few days out there. She's lived under the Vance roof her entire life. She doesn't know how to survive without a staff catering to her every whim. Dominic and Luke looked at each other, both shaking their heads simultaneously. Julian, I really don't think you understand your wife at all, Dominic noted quietly. Luke nodded in agreement. I think so too. Chloe might look slender and delicate, but her core is pure steel. Once she makes a call, nobody can bend her. Julian adjusted his designer cuffs, his tone dismissive. I know exactly what kind of person she is. You two don't need to stress over it. Dominic still felt uneasy. Julian, I think you should swallow your pride and go talk to her. She's a girl, just buy her something nice and smooth things over. Get her back to the estate as fast as possible. Luke chimed in, yeah, Julian. Even if you don't give a damn about the public relations fallout, don't forget that Chloe holds a 20% equity stake in Vance Enterprises left to her by her grandfather. At the mention of the equity, Julian's eyes instantly darkened into a menacing glare. 2 years ago, his grandfather had practically held a knife to his throat to force the proposal to Chloe. Simultaneously, the old man had executed an absolute transfer of a 20% stake in the family empire directly to her name. Before that, Julian had always believed Chloe's profound devotion to his grandfather was pure, innocent gratitude. Only later did he conclude it was all a calculated play to secure the title of Mrs. Vance and the astronomical wealth that came with it. Seeing Julian's expression sour, Dominic slid a fruit platter over to break the tension. By the way, Julian, has Chloe ever brought up the topic of the shares with you? Julian's gaze hardened further. Never. I've tested the waters a few times, but she always plays dumb and changes the subject. Luke patted Julian's shoulder consolingly. Look, Julian, Grandpa Vance must have had his reasons for that setup. Besides, the marriage is already a done deal, and you two basically grew up together as childhood sweethearts. Why not just try to make it work? Julian violently slapped Luke's hand off his shoulder. Then you tell me, how exactly am I supposed to make it work with a woman who trapped me? Luke rubbed his head, completely at a loss for words. Dominic set his glass down on the marble table. Julian, we get that you feel trapped. But the reality is set. You can't actually divorce her without fracturing the company. Even if you don't want to play house, there's no operational benefit in making her an enemy. Dominic's words actually penetrated Julian's anger. He was right. Purely for the survival of the Vance legacy, he couldn't afford a scorched earth war with her. As the three men continued drinking, a coordinator led a group of beautiful young women into the private suite. Hey, Mr. Lin. Mr. Tang. It's been ages. The women offered bright greetings, immediately trying to slide into the open seats beside the two heirs. Julian cast a cold, detached glance over the scene, stood up, and walked straight out of the room. Luke and Dominic instantly pushed the women away. Sorry, ladies, we've got urgent business tonight. Next time, all right? Next time. With that, Luke grabbed Dominic, and the two bolted out the door after him. Julian didn't wait for either of them. He got into his car and drove straight to his private luxury penthouse in the city center. Under the cover of night, the metropolis remained a sea of brilliant neon and heavy traffic. He pulled out his phone and dialed the one number he absolutely loathed calling. The line rang twice, only to be abruptly disconnected. Julian stood frozen in sheer shock. Growing up, he had never once experienced a slammed door from her. He assumed it was a cellular network glitch and immediately redialed, only for the automated voice to inform him that the device had been switched off. Julian stared at the screen, his dark brows knitting together. This was the first time in his life he had ever tasted rejection at her hands. The following morning, Chloe awoke early. Seeing that Harper was still dead to the world, sprawled diagonally across the center of the mattress, she quietly left the apartment to fetch breakfast. Knowing exactly what her best friend loved, she bought an absolute feast of traditional gourmet dim sum, shrimp dumplings, rice noodle rolls, and sweet pastries, figuring the leftovers could easily be stored in the fridge for lunch. Living on her own now, cooking was bound to be a learning curve. She hadn't spent a single day in a kitchen growing up, but she wasn't worried. There was nothing in this world she couldn't master if she actually dedicated her mind to learning it. Returning to the apartment, she set the containers on the dining table and tiptoed back into the bedroom. Harper was still fast asleep, limbs thrown every which way. Chloe let out a silent breath of relief. If Harper were any heavier, Chloe felt she might have suffocated under her friend's chaotic sleeping posture last night. She slid her hand under the pillow to retrieve her phone, pressed the power button, and realized the battery was completely drained. Tiptoeing back out to the living room, She plugged it into the charger. Shrimp dumplings, crystal buns, honey-glazed pastries. Where are you guys? The aromatic scent of the dim sum spread had drifted into the bedroom, successfully raising Harper from the dead. She bolted awake, running out to the living room completely barefoot. Chloe, my beautiful Chloe. Oh my God, I am absolutely obsessed with you. Seeing the table loaded with her absolute favorites, Harper's eyes practically welled with tears of joy. Without even bothering to brush her teeth, she reached out to grab a piece. Chloe darted over, smacking her hand away. Go wash up first. I already squeezed the toothpaste for you. Harper gasped dramatically. You are the absolute definition of a perfect wife. Julian Vance must have saved a galaxy in his past life to land you. Chloe shot her a sharp look. Let's not ruin a beautiful morning by mentioning that name. Harper took the hint instantly. Understood. After a massive breakfast, Harper insisted on a trip to the mall. She had noticed the day before that while the apartment was fully furnished with high-end designer pieces, it completely lacked everyday lifestyle essentials. Understandable, since the unit had been vacant for years. Conveniently, a luxury shopping center sat just a few blocks away, making a quick round trip effortless. Chloe agreed without hesitation. It had been ages since she had enjoyed a carefree shopping trip. Previously, to maintain the flawless optics of Mrs. Vance, every single public outing required hours of meticulous styling and heavy curation. She despised excessive vanity, so she had simply stopped going out. But things were different now. She had chosen to shed the heavy armor of a billionaire's wife, meaning walking around completely barefaced carried zero consequences. She was starting a new life. Chloe threw on a casual, effortless lounge set, but Harper insisted on maintaining her identical deep-cover disguise from the day before. Chloe sweated just looking at her, but since her friend refused to budge, she didn't press the matter. Located in the most elite district of the city center, the shopping mall catered exclusively to ultra-high-net-worth clients. As they stepped onto the ground floor, which housed the premier luxury flagship boutiques, Harper's feet practically glued themselves to the floor the moment she saw the new seasonal arrivals. Chloe, look at those dresses. We have to go in. Chloe knew her best friend's habits inside out. Since they had plenty of time, she was perfectly happy to play stylist. Inside the boutique, Harper scanned the racks, her eyes lighting up. Yes, this is exactly my vibe. She pulled down a stunning, structured dress and was just about to head to the fitting room when a manicured hand violently snatched it from her grasp. Harper lowered her sunglasses, her gaze locking onto a woman with voluminous, heavy curls. It was Serena Wong. Serena belonged to the exact same talent agency as Harper, but her profile was significantly higher, boasting a solid Bliss standing. She was wearing full, airbrushed makeup, her body poured into a skin-tight designer outfit that accentuated every curve. Serena recognized Harper immediately, but she showed zero intention of yielding the garment. This piece demands an absolute flawless silhouette, Harper. It's really not your tier. Harper was generally an incredibly easygoing person, but Serena's words hit a direct nerve. What exactly do you mean by not my tier? On what grounds am I not suited for it? Who gave you the authority to decide what fits me? Harper's volume spiked, causing several high-end shoppers nearby to turn their heads. Serena felt a flash of social embarrassment, but given her superior celebrity status and leverage within their agency, she refused to back down in public. Harper, take a good look in the mirror. You lack the necessary definition. Buying this dress would be an absolute waste of fine tailoring. Harper was the sole daughter of the Low Empire. She had never endured this kind of disrespect in her personal life. Though she wasn't a superstar, her standing as the Low family's princess carried immense weight. The agency's executive board wouldn't dare cross her if they knew. However, she possessed a fierce streak of independence and refused to rely on her family's capital, purposely concealing her background from her colleagues to make it on her own merit. Harper violently snatched the dress back. Associate, wrap this up. I'm buying it. She didn't even care about trying it on anymore. She just wanted to crush Serena's arrogance. Serena let out a cold snort, pulling a gold VIP card from her designer handbag. Associate, put it on my account. Process it now. The sales associate accepted Serena's card with both hands. After verifying the account status, her posture turned instantly subservient. Of course, Ms. Wang. One moment, please. We will process your transaction immediately. Harper's fury hit the ceiling. What is the meaning of this? I secured this garment first. On what authority are you processing her transaction over mine? Luxury brand associates were meticulously trained in high society politics. The woman offered a deeply practiced, apologetic smile. Madam, I am terribly sorry. Ms. Wang is one of our elite gold tier members. According to corporate policy, all limited inventory is prioritized for active members. Already having an awful week, the associate's explanation triggered Harper's competitive drive. Fine. How do I get a membership? Process one for me right now. The boutique manager quickly stepped in to manage the escalation. Apologies, madam, but our elite membership operates strictly on a cumulative expenditure system. Ms. Wang has maintained an active expenditure exceeding $1 million with our brand, which automatically unlocks her priority status. Hearing the figure, Harper paused. She only pulled in a few $1,000s per acting gig. If she dropped $1 million purely to settle a petty score, it felt like an absolute financial loss. Fine. She can keep the dress. Harper grabbed Chloe's arm, turning to walk out. Serena's voice drifted tauntingly from behind them. Know your bracket before you try to compete for luxury pieces. Figure out your own celebrity standing first. To launch a personal attack over a piece of clothing was something Harper absolutely could not swallow. She reached into her bag, prepared to pull out her family-issued diamond black card and absorb the financial hit, but Chloe's hand gently clamped down on her wrist. Harper, let me take care of it. Chloe knew her friend's current self-imposed financial constraints. She was working off a tight budget and refused to touch her family's wealth. Chloe, it's fine. I have the capital. Before Harper could finish her sentence, Chloe pulled a sleek, matte black gold corporate house card from her wallet. Process the transaction, please, Chloe said smoothly. The boutique manager's eyes locked onto the card, and her entire demeanor shifted instantly into absolute reverence. Of course, madam. Right away. We will have everything packaged for you immediately. To Serena's utter confusion, the staff didn't even run the card through the terminal. Instead, they immediately began delicately wrapping the dress in premium garment tissue. Serena lost her composure. What is the meaning of this? I am an active gold card member, and I demanded the item first. Why are you handing it to her? The manager turned, her voice dripping with profound apology. Deepest apologies, Ms. Wang. This lady holds our brand's absolute highest-tier house card, a pre-funded corporate account that automatically overrides standard VIP priority. Serena glared at Chloe, murmuring under her breath, a pre-funded card. How much could possibly be on it? The manager, clearly tired of Serena's dramatic display, replied in a low, level tone, the minimum maintaining balance for this tier is $5 million. Serena's mouth snapped shut instantly. She wasn't an idiot. She knew anyone capable of leaving a $5 million rolling credit with a single fashion house possessed a social bracket and leverage she couldn't dare cross. Though she couldn't place the elegant woman's face, she knew she had just stepped on a landmine. Clutching her bag, she turned and scurried out of the boutique in absolute humiliation. Meanwhile, at the Vance Enterprises executive tower, Julian's executive assistant, Caleb, burst into the corner office. Mr. Vance, we have an update regarding Mrs. Vance. Outside the mall, Harper was practically clinging to Chloe's arm like a koala, refusing to let go. Today's victory wasn't about the money. It was a matter of absolute face and personal dignity. Her best friend had protected her honor, crushed her rival, and saved her a fortune in the process. Chloe, sweetie, I am absolutely, completely in love with you. You are an absolute angel. Harper, if you keep pulling me like this, I'm literally going to trip, Chloe laughed, though her arms were already aching from carrying all the luxury shopping bags. Harper was acting like pure dead weight. It's too hot out anyway. Chloe shivered playfully despite the summer heat. The two girls finally returned to the apartment building. The moment they stepped out of the elevator penthouse foyer, they spotted a man standing directly outside her door. The man's silhouette was undeniable: broad shoulders, a tapered waist, and a sharp, bespoke suit that emphasized his powerful build. As the man turned around, Harper couldn't suppress a sharp gasp. Julian Vance. Chloe glanced at him, then turned her head to Harper. Harper, go ahead and head out first. I have things to settle with him. We'll hang out in a few days. Harper was incredibly sharp. She knew this was an absolute private battleground that required her exit. Chloe, if anything goes sideways, you call me instantly. With that, Harper hoisted her shopping bags and stepped back into the elevator, throwing a venomous glare at Julian just as the door slid shut. Chloe unlocked the door. Come in. Julian followed her inside, his face like stone. Chloe set her bags down on the console, walked over to pour a glass of water, and handed it to him. You're here to finalize the divorce paperwork, I assume? Looking at the man who felt both deeply familiar and entirely like a stranger, Chloe took the initiative. Why did you decline my call last night? Julian's voice was laced with sharp authority, seizing the upper hand instantly. Chloe looked at him with utter confusion. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the logs. Sure enough, there was a missed call from the dead of night, but she had been out cold from the flu medication. I was asleep. I didn't hear it. Then why was your device powered down? Julian pressed, his tone unyielding. The battery died, Chloe replied naturally. Julian assumed she was manufacturing a smooth lie, his icy glare locking onto her face. Chloe felt incredibly uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny. She stood up to fetch a bottle of juice from the fridge to break the tension. Just tell me when you want to head to the attorney's office. I can adapt to your corporate schedule. We aren't divorcing, Julian answered, his face remaining entirely frozen. Not divorcing? Chloe let out a soft, incredulous laugh. In the 2 years they had been married, the number of times they had actually seen each other face-to-face could be counted on 2 hands. What was the operational point of maintaining a dead marriage? Mr. Vance, marriage requires 2 people, but divorce does not. I can file a unilateral petition for dissolution. Our marriage possesses 0 affection. Staying together is a pure waste of each other's lives. Our marriage does not require affection, Julian stated, taking a slow sip of the water, his tone flat and clinical. Does not require affection. His words caused Chloe to freeze for a fraction of a second. Mr. Vance, your marriage might not require affection, but mine does. Please find a window in your schedule so we can dissolve this legally. Julian set the glass down onto the counter with a deliberate click. Chloe, let me make this clear. There are too many corporate and financial interests intertwined between us. A divorce is an absolute impossibility. Chloe offered a cold smile, assuming he was referring to the standard asset division. Mr. Vance, you can rest easy. Even though we never executed a prenuptial agreement, I am not touching a single cent of your net worth. A flash of mockery crossed Julian's eyes. In his mind, she was finally hitting her breaking point. She realized the role of Mrs. Vance wasn't an easy ride and was planning to take her equity stake and run. He had 0 intention of letting her win. Julian stood up, closing the distance between them, and stood over her, using his height to look down at her. Chloe, I've said it once, and I won't say it again. The corporate ties are too deep. A divorce is not happening. Then what exactly are you doing in my apartment? Chloe's temper finally flared. She had genuinely believed he had come to handle the legal separation. I'm here to remind you that the title of Mrs. Vance carries immense responsibility. Since you insisted on securing it, you had better fall in line and stay quiet. Do not bring any unnecessary scandals to the Vance legacy. With that, Julian turned on his heel and walked out the door. Chloe stared fixedly at the empty doorway long after he left, waiting for her racing heart to calm down. The man was still as ruthless and unfeeling as ever. If he truly believed their marriage was a calculated trap, why on earth was he refusing to let her go? Leaving the apartment complex, Julian didn't head back to the corporate headquarters. Instead, he drove straight back to the family estate. He had forgotten to stamp a set of critical executive documents the day before and needed to retrieve them. Ever since Chloe had moved out, the grand villa felt entirely devoid of life. Victoria was resting in the master wing, Martha and Lily were quietly scrolling through their phones in the staff room, and Thomas was out in the courtyard walking the family dog. Seeing Julian's car pull up, Thomas quickly hurried over to guide the golden retriever, Buster, back into his enclosure. "Welcome back, young master." Julian had returned to the estate more times in the past 48 hours than he had in the last 6 months, and Thomas was struggling to adapt to the sudden frequency. "Have Martha prepare dinner. I'll eat here before heading back to the city," Julian instructed. Thomas nodded quickly and headed toward the kitchen. Hearing Julian's voice, Victoria walked out of her room with hurried steps. "Julian," her tone anxious. Julian paused on the staircase, looking back at her coldly. "Is there an issue?" Victoria squeezed her hands together. "Your father just called from his trip. He asked about you and Chloe." Julian withdrew his foot from the step, turning to sit down on the living room sofa. "And what did he say?" "He saw your broadcast interview," Victoria said, joining him. "He called to ask how Chloe reacted. I knew I couldn't conceal the reality, so I told him the truth." "And?" Julian adjusted his jacket, leaning back lazily. Victoria let out a heavy sigh. "Your father is absolutely furious. He commanded you to bring Chloe back immediately and extend a formal, sincere apology. The public fallout right now is massive. The tabloids are flooded with negative press about the family. If this continues, the corporate stock and our business relations are going to take a severe hit." Julian's face remained entirely unbothered. Every multinational corporation faces negative PR cycles. The news cycle will move on in a few weeks. Victoria was practically ready to stomp her foot in frustration. "Julian, this cycle is different. Your father has 3 separate subsidiary entities currently in the pipeline to go public. If the Vance family is buried under a mountain of domestic scandals right now, his entire strategic roadmap for the last 3 years will be completely wiped out." Julian lowered his gaze, his dark brows knitting together in silent calculation. He stood up and headed upstairs to his study without another word. Victoria's heart finally settled slightly. Just as dinner was about to be served, Tiffany Vance arrived home. She was wearing a beige designer dress, her heavy, blunt bangs entirely covering her forehead. The driver followed closely behind her, hauling a mountain of luggage from her trip. Tiffany was Victoria's biological daughter and Julian's younger half-sister. Having grown bored a few weeks back, she had jetted off to Europe with a group of socialite friends. On her way back from the airport, she had caught up on the family drama via the tabloids. Learning that Chloe had officially packed her bags and left the estate brought a secret, overwhelming wave of satisfaction to her heart. Growing up, every single person in the family had orbited around Chloe. Even though Tiffany was the actual biological heiress of the Vance bloodline, she had always felt like an absolute ghost in her own home. She had assumed things would improve once Chloe married out, but to her absolute horror, Chloe had gone ahead and married her older brother, effectively becoming the permanent matriarch of the Vance legacy. Tiffany had harbored a bitter resentment for years, but given her parents' absolute devotion to Chloe, she had never dared to voice it. She headed upstairs, threw on a casual outfit, and came down to the dining table. "Julian, I watched your live interview a few days ago. You were absolutely incredible." Julian wasn't in the best frame of mind, but he forced a faint, affectionate smile for his sister. He had always spoiled her. Growing up, whatever luxury item was bought for Chloe, an identical one was always provided for Tiffany. Incredible how? Those corporate responses. "I mean, I didn't understand half of the financial jargon, but you looked like an absolute corporate genius." And that final answer? It was the coolest thing I've ever witnessed. Though she had always known Julian harbored zero affection for Chloe, this was the absolute first time he had weaponized a public platform to validate it. Victoria shot Tiffany a sharp, warning glare. "Grow up and watch your mouth." Tiffany slammed her fork down onto the table, her expression turning defiant. What did I say wrong? Julian was completely right. That marriage was nothing but a calculated trap engineered by Chloe. She was just an adopted orphan the family took in. What right did she ever have to become the matriarch of the Vance empire? Julian let out a low, humorless chuckle and continued eating. Seeing that her brother wasn't defending Chloe, Tiffany grew even bolder. At least she had a shred of self-awareness left. She knew you saw right through her little charade, so she finally packed up her things and slunk away. Slap. Victoria slammed her utensils onto the mahogany table with immense force, her voice booming across the room as she scolded her daughter. Be quiet. Victoria had never once utilized that tone with her daughter, and the sudden severity left Tiffany's face burning with public humiliation, especially with the household staff present. I am speaking the absolute truth, Tiffany yelled, clutching her stinging cheek as tears welled up. She's nothing but an outsider grandfather brought home from the streets. What right does she have to hold the title of Mrs. Vance? She must have used some disgusting, underhanded scheme to lock Julian down. Victoria's fury peaked. She raised her hand and delivered a sharp slap directly across Tiffany's cheek. Do you have any idea how your sister-in-law has treated you over the years? She accommodated your every whim, gave you the absolute best of everything, and this is how you speak of her. Seeing the escalation, the dining staff hurriedly retreated from the space. Tiffany held her face, bursting into hysterical, aggrieved tears. She's still an outsider. Seeing her daughter refuse to back down, Victoria pressed a hand to her own chest, suddenly gasping for breath. Her delivery with Tiffany had been an absolute medical crisis that nearly cost her her life, which was why she had always sheltered and coddled her. Seeing her grow into such a spoiled, malicious person broke her heart, but looking at her own flesh and blood crying, Victoria still felt a pang of maternal sorrow. She reached out, grasping Tiffany's hand, and tried to speak reasonably. Tiffany, do you have even a basic understanding of the financial damage Chloe's departure is causing this family? Seeing Tiffany quiet down slightly, she continued, your father has multiple corporate entities waiting to go public. If the Vance family name is dragged through a high-profile domestic scandal right now, your father's life's work will be ruined, and our active business operations will face a massive crisis. Tiffany possessed zero understanding of corporate finance or market dynamics. She violently flung her mother's hand away. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that she's gone, and that makes me happy. Seeing her daughter behave with such profound, selfish ignorance, Victoria turned to the head housekeeper. Martha, starting tonight, lock the young mistress in her quarters. She is absolutely grounded until further notice. Martha knew the matriarch's commands were absolute, and given the toxic atmosphere, it was best for the young lady to clear the room. Martha moved forward to guide her up. Tiffany threw a venomous glare at her mother, shielded her face, and ran crying back to her room. Julian had completely lost his appetite. He pushed his plate aside, grabbed his keys, and drove straight back to his downtown penthouse. After running a hot bath, he immersed himself in the water, the warnings from Victoria and the toxic rants from Tiffany looping continuously through his mind. 30 minutes later, he reached for his phone and dialed a number. Caleb was right in the middle of a shower when his phone began buzzing. Hearing the ringtone, he scrambled out of the stall, dripping soap suds all over the bathroom floor. He knew there was only one individual who called at this hour. Good evening, Mr. Vance. Caleb, coordinate a security detail for tomorrow morning, Julian commanded coldly. Understood, sir, Caleb replied instantly. The next morning, Chloe had just returned from buying fresh pastries when she discovered a row of tall, imposing men dressed in sharp black suits standing directly outside her apartment door. She didn't recognize them. Just as she was about to demand an explanation, Julian's silhouette emerged from behind the security line. Chloe's expression turned instantly cold. Mr. Vance, what is the meaning of this? Julian didn't offer a verbal response. He simply raised a hand, and the security detail immediately stepped back to clear a path. Seeing his silence, Chloe pulled out her keys, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Just as she attempted to slam the door shut, a powerful hand clamped onto the frame, forcing it open. Physically outmatched, she had no choice but to let him enter. Julian walked in and lazily threw himself onto the designer sofa. Chloe completely ignored his presence, washed her hands, and sat down at the dining table to eat her breakfast. The scent of the fresh food drifted over to Julian, who had arrived on an empty stomach, causing his throat to constrict slightly. "Chloe, wrap up your breakfast and start packing," Julian ordered, his tone clipping the air. "I brought the security team to handle the heavy lifting for your move back." Only then did Chloe realize the purpose of the men stationed in the hallway. She took a slow sip of her milk and replied evenly, "I am not moving back, Julian. The day I walked out of the Vance estate was the day I closed that chapter permanently." Julian stood up, slowly closing the distance until he stood directly over her table. "I said, you are moving back." His tone was razor-sharp, leaving zero margin for negotiation. The moment the words left his lips, the security guards stepped into the foyer, prepared to begin clearing her items. Witnessing this, Chloe grabbed a crystal tumbler from the table and violently hurled it onto the hardwood floor. The explosive sound of shattering glass echoed violently through the entire residence. "Let's see which one of you dares to touch my things." Chloe had been personally groomed and educated by the old patriarch, Grandpa Vance. Setting aside her exceptional executive capabilities, the raw, commanding authority she could project when pushed was something very few ordinary individuals cared to challenge. The security guards froze, looking at each other, and slowly retreated back into the hallway at Julian's silent hand gesture. Julian's tone softened by a fraction. "Chloe, regardless of whether you view yourself as the girl raised by the family or the current Mrs. Vance, you should possess enough strategic sense to know that moving out while the corporation is facing a negative public relations cycle is a terrible move." Hearing his shift in tone, Chloe sat back down, but his explanation left a bitter, suffocating weight in her chest. "Mr. Vance, you seem to have suffered a lapse in memory. I have already initiated a divorce. Moving out of your residence is the only logical step." Julian's patience snapped. "Chloe, choosing this exact coordinate to walk away is a direct act of sabotage against Vance Enterprises. I suggest you look at the macro picture. We can settle our private disputes once the market stabilizes." Chloe stared at him, her gaze fixed. The Vance legacy mattered deeply to her as well. After all, it was the sanctuary where she had spent her entire childhood. Yet, for 2 whole years, she had tolerated his absolute freezing cold detachment and utter cruelty, all to protect that very same macro picture. And what was her ROI? Being branded a manipulative gold digger on national television. "Julian, our marriage is effectively over. Protecting the macro picture of the Vance family is no longer my operational concern." Chloe pushed her chair back, intending to retreat to her bedroom. Julian moved with lightning speed, his hand clamping onto her arm and violently pulling her back. Her frame was light, the force of his pull sent her crashing directly into his broad chest. The distance between them vanished instantly, so close that they could feel the rapid rhythm of each other's breaths. This marked the absolute first time in their entire 2-year marriage that they had ever experienced this degree of physical proximity. The subtle scent of his expensive cologne drifted into her senses, leaving her momentarily dazed. However, her cognitive functions returned instantly, and she quickly took 2 sharp steps backward to re-establish a boundary. Julian's eyes filled with a dangerous frost. "Moving back to the estate is the only viable option you possess right now, Chloe." Chloe tilted her chin, her eyes filling with absolute defiance. "And if I refuse?" A wave of pure fury flashed through Julian's dark eyes. "Chloe, for years you put on a flawless performance of absolute devotion to my grandfather. Wasn't it all explicitly engineered to lock down the status of Mrs. Vance? What's the matter? You've only held the title for 2 short years, and suddenly you're ready to throw it away." Chloe looked up at him, her expression shifting to one of profound disbelief. "Julian, what exactly are you implying? Do not project your own malice onto my character." She had been raised by his grandfather since childhood. Her devotion to the old man was pure, unadulterated filial love. Julian refused to relent. "Projecting malice? If you weren't hunting for the title of Mrs. Vance, why on earth would my grandfather use his dying breaths to force me into marrying you?" Why would he force me to stage a public proposal in front of the entire media corps? Grandpa forced him to marry her. The revelation hit Chloe's mind like a physical detonation, leaving her brain buzzing. No wonder he had weaponized the live interview to claim his marriage was a calculated trap. This was his narrative. Chloe's body swayed slightly, her balance faltering as the room seemed to tilt. "What's the matter?" "Guilty," Julian remarked, returning to the sofa and crossing his legs, watching her like a spectator observing a theatrical play. Chloe stared at him, the crushing weight of 2 years of unvoiced agony rushing to the surface. The reality that she loved Julian was a secret she had shared exclusively with Grandpa Vance. She never, in her wildest nightmares, could have fathomed that the old man would use that vulnerability to coerce Julian into an alliance. "Julian, I never once desired or calculated to become the mistress of the Vance house." She understood her placement perfectly. She was an orphan who had lost her biological parents, an adopted ward. Even though she harbored a deep love for him, she had never dared to dream of crossing that class boundary. "Do you honestly expect me to buy that performance?" Julian narrowed his eyes, his face filled with utter cynicism. Of course, she thought. To an arrogant, dictatorial man like him, any explanation from another individual was nothing but a crafted lie. "Whether you choose to allocate belief or not changes nothing. My statement is the absolute reality," Chloe said, her voice tightening with urgency. "Exceptional acting talent," Julian mocked, his eyes laced with absolute sarcasm. His words acted like a physical chokehold, leaving Chloe feeling as though she were suffocating from the sheer injustice of it. Right at that exact coordinate of tension, the apartment door was slowly pushed open. "Chloe, sweetie." Victoria walked into the space. She had clearly navigated the journey with immense haste. A layer of fine sweat was visible on her forehead. Chloe hadn't anticipated her mother-in-law's arrival and quickly stepped away to brew a fresh cup of tea to break the suffocating silence. As the three of them sat across from each other on the sofas, the toxic energy stabilized slightly. Victoria maintained her signature high society grace throughout the interaction. She took 2 delicate sips of the tea before setting the porcelain cup back onto the glass table. "Chloe, Mom knows how deeply you've been wronged. But I came over today hoping you would consider moving back to the estate. Your father is deeply invested in your situation." I explained the reality to him, and he explicitly charged me with coming here to persuade you. Chloe had always maintained absolute respect for her elders. She had never once defied her parents-in-law. But this coordinate was different. She was absolutely resolved. "Mom, thank you, and please thank Dad for the care. But I have zero intention of ever returning to the Vance estate." Victoria shifted her gaze to Julian, throwing him a sharp look before turning back to Chloe. "Chloe, I know Julian's past behavior has been utterly thoughtless. He lacked basic consideration and froze you out. But your father explicitly stated that the moment he returns, he will discipline him thoroughly." Victoria reached out, gently patting Chloe's hand. "As parents, our only desire is to see you two build a functional life together. This entire crisis is entirely Julian's fault. Rest assured, we will ensure he treats you with the respect you deserve moving forward." Recalling Julian's venomous accusations from just moments prior, a lump formed in Chloe's throat. "Mom, he and I were in absolute error from the very first step. A divorce is the only logical conclusion." Victoria quickly threw an urgent look at Julian, silently commanding him to offer a bridge, to state a compromise, to do anything to de-escalate. After a heavy silence, Julian slowly rose to his feet. He walked over, standing directly in front of Chloe, looking down at her from his height. "Chloe, if you are absolutely resolved on executing a divorce, I can accommodate that choice. However, you must execute an absolute return of the 20% equity stake in Vance Enterprises that grandfather allocated to you." The equity stake. Grandpa had left her a 20% stake in the empire? She had remained completely blind to this detail. Chloe's eyes widened in genuine, unscripted shock. One had to understand that Vance Enterprises was an absolute financial monolith. A 20% equity share held a market valuation translating to tens of billions of dollars. Seeing the chaotic, complex emotions flickering across her face, Julian let out a cold, mocking laugh. "What's the matter?" Reluctant to sign it away. He adjusted his collar with a long, elegant finger. "Understandable, I suppose. An asset allocation of that magnitude, if I were in your bracket, I'd be reluctant to let it go too. After all, it represents the absolute crown jewel of the wealth and status you spent years engineering. How could you possibly give it up so easily?" Years engineering. A physical pang of agony pierced Chloe's chest. She looked up at Julian, her vision blurring as tears finally threatened to break. They had grown up together under the same roof. He knew every facet of her character, yet he could stand there and weaponize these disgusting accusations to decimate her dignity. Victoria was well aware of the equity allocation, but she had never once questioned the old patriarch's estate planning. She knew better than anyone that the Vance Empire's current market dominance was entirely due to the old man's unparalleled foresight and strategic decisions. "Julian, watch your tongue. That is entirely uncalled for." Victoria, usually incredibly gentle with him, could no longer tolerate his relentless malice. Julian shot Chloe a final look of pure disdain. "Chloe, I suggest you take the logical path. Move back to the estate and continue executing your duties as Mrs. Vance." Chloe's tears were right on the verge of spilling over. She forced herself to endure the agony, pressing her nails into her palms until it drew physical pain. For 2 whole years, she had minimized her own existence, tolerating his absolute isolation and cold shoulder. Every single slight was etched into her memory. But she realized she possessed zero leverage to blame him now, because entering the marriage had never been his autonomous choice. She understood that Grandpa's strategy had been pure protection. Forcing the alliance and securing the equity were all measures to ensure she possessed a permanent safety net for the rest of her life. Yet, those exact acts of love had become the evidence of her calculation in Julian's eyes. Chloe silently pulled out her phone, her thumb lightly tracing the digital photograph of her late grandfather on the screen. The tears finally broke, tracing a quiet path down her face. "Julian, let's execute the divorce. I will return the absolute entirety of the 20% equity stake to the Vance family." She refused a marriage devoid of love, and she absolutely refused to carry the public infamy of a gold digger. Chloe's immediate compliance struck Julian like a physical blow. He froze entirely, his face filled with unscripted disbelief. Wasn't this asset the absolute objective she had spent her life scheming to acquire? Why on earth was she walking away from it with such effortless finality? "Chloe, you had better calculate the reality of your choice," Julian said, his voice dropping into an intense register. "The moment you sign those papers, you lose the title of Mrs. Vance and you walk away from a net worth valued in the billions of dollars. Are you genuinely prepared to lose all of it?" Chloe met his gaze with absolute, unyielding finality. "I am prepared. We are divorcing, Mr. Vance. And it is my absolute hope that from this day forward, we exist as absolute strangers, completely out of each other's lives." Chloe's absolute resolution left Victoria weeping silently. Though she held the status of an elder, the private choices of the younger generation were beyond her jurisdiction. She could offer counsel, but she couldn't control the outcome. Chloe understood her mother-in-law's sorrow. She walked over, wrapping her arms around her in a gentle embrace. "Mom, your health has been fragile lately. Please focus on taking care of your body moving forward." Hearing her daughter-in-law's final words of care, Victoria's heart broke entirely. "Oh, Chloe, my heart absolutely breaks for you, sweetie." Chloe knew the older woman's affection was authentic. She lightly patted her back. "I know, Mom. I know you care. Thank you for absolutely everything." The trajectory was locked. When Victoria departed the apartment, Julian remained behind for a moment, his cognitive processes deeply fractured. On the surface, the narrative was perfectly clear, yet a lingering instinct suggested an absolute error in his calculations. Chloe had zero desire to look at him a second longer and directly forced him out of her residence. Once the apartment settled into absolute silence, Chloe locked the door from the inside. She slid down against the wood, sitting flat on the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees as she curled into the corner. Slowly, the floodgates of past memories swung open, submerging her mind. The sky turned dark. Chloe slowly stood up, walked over to the table, and dialed a number. The connection was instantaneous. "Mr. Miller, please proceed." The attorney agreed to compile the absolute dissolution agreement with maximum speed and have it delivered for signatures. While the legal machinery was moving toward a final resolution, Julian's internal state was in absolute chaos. That evening, the Eclipse Lounge. "Julian, drop the glass. You've had enough." Luke violently snatched the crystal tumbler from Julian's hand. "Give it to me." Julian violently yanked it back, his grip ironclad. Seeing the escalation, Dominic quickly seized the remaining bottles and hid them beneath the bar console. "Look, Julian, what on earth happened to make you self-destruct like this?" Julian offered zero verbal output, continuing to drain his drink. Luke and Dominic exchanged a long look, their shared instincts guessing 80% of the scenario. "Julian, is this regarding Chloe? Did you two have a massive fallout?" Luke hazarded the guess. Julian set his empty glass down onto the bar, his voice dropping into a low, rasping register. "She wants a divorce." "A divorce." Luke and Dominic shouted in unison, before instantly clamping their hands over their mouths. The Vance legacy was currently buried under a mountain of toxic PR. If a high-profile divorce action dropped right now, the entire family enterprise would be roasted alive on the market. Luke crossed his arms, his legs swinging over the barstool. "Julian, you're the executive VP of Vance Enterprises. Do you lack a basic understanding of our current corporate exposure? Forget a divorce. Even a standard domestic dispute has to be meticulously managed right now." "Julian, why would Chloe suddenly demand a divorce?" Dominic asked, maintaining his characteristic clinical approach, trying to analyze the root cause. "She's the absolute blueprint of a perfect high society wife. She wouldn't choose this specific window to drop a bomb like this without a massive catalyst." Luke remembered something, his crossed legs dropping instantly. "Could it be an emotional reaction to your live broadcast interview from the other morning?" Julian offered no confirmation, continuing his silent consumption of the alcohol. Dominic gave Luke a subtle thumb up, assuming his friend had finally cracked the code. Julian set his glass down, his tone flat. "That's not the entire equation." Luke and Dominic were his absolute brothers. They were cleared for access to virtually every aspect of his life. Then what exactly is the missing variable? "Come on, you silent vault, talk to us." Luke was practically on the verge of physical frustration. Dominic quickly reached out, pulling Luke back behind his shoulder. "Julian, we are your brothers. Don't lock this inside your own head. Give us the data." Julian raised his dark eyes, looking at his two friends. "I think my core hypothesis was wrong." Luke and Dominic looked at each other, completely blindsided. What on earth was he talking about? They couldn't parse the data at all. Julian's personality was notoriously rigid. He never, under any circumstances, admitted an operational error. For him to voice this meant the reality was monumental. "Julian, give us a clear breakdown." "We're losing our minds here," Luke said, his left fist pounding into his right palm. Seeing his friend's genuine distress, Julian finally unlocked the vault. "When we entered the marriage, I operated under the absolute assumption that she desired the status and wealth of Mrs. Vance, and that she had engineered my grandfather's leverage to force my hand. But today, she explicitly stated to my face that she never once desired the title." The two friends looked at each other, another wave of silent shock rippling through them. Tonight's data download was astronomically heavy. "Julian, Chloe has always been exceptionally brilliant, and her devotion to your grandfather was flawless," Dominic reasoned, sharing his independent analysis. "It makes perfect sense that Grandpa Vance wanted her locked into the family legacy. With the sheer scale of the Vance empire, you guys never required a strategic corporate alliance marriage anyway." Hearing the word devotion, Julian drained another shot. Of course. Even his independent friends could recognize her actions as pure filial love. Why was he the solitary individual who had categorized it as calculation and manipulation? "Julian, I know Chloe isn't the type of person to sabotage a corporate legacy," Dominic concluded, offering strategic counsel. Go back, issue a formal apology, admit your operational error, and start treating her with the value she deserves. Compensate for the isolation you subjected her to over the past 2 years. There's a high probability she'll rescind the divorce petition. Isolation. Compensation. Julian let out a low, self-deprecating laugh as the alcohol clouded his processing. Yes. For 2 whole years, he had subjected her to absolute domestic exile. Previously, when he refused to set foot in the estate for months, she had never once weaponized words against him or broken character. Yet today, she had acted with absolute, unyielding finality to execute a split. She was entirely resolved to excise him from her life. Julian, execute Dominic's strategy, Luke urged. Go back, fix the damage, buy a massive peace offering, and smooth it over. Don't forget, she holds a 20% equity stake in your empire. Julian's head sank into his palms, his voice laced with absolute defeat. She walked away from it. The alcohol was heavily affecting his speech. What do you mean by walked away? Luke asked, stunned. She's relinquishing the 20% equity share just to secure a split from you? No way. Why would she be that reckless? Chloe possesses a core of pure steel, Dominic noted, his face grave. If she's pushed to her limit, she is absolutely capable of an execution like that. So, does that mean Julian just scored a massive financial windfall, or did he take a massive loss? Luke asked, his processing completely short-circuiting. The two friends continued their rapid analysis, completely ignoring Julian's presence. Julian's deep eyes were turning bloodshot as the emotional weight tore through him. She doesn't want a single thing from me. With that, he violently grabbed the lapels of Luke's designer shirt. You tell me, did she scheme against me or not? If she engineered the trap to get the wealth, why on earth is she surrendering it with such absolute ease? Luke was being choked by the tight grip and waved frantically to Dominic for backup. Dominic stepped in, utilizing physical force to unlock Julian's fingers. Julian, the data is glaringly obvious. If Chloe's objective was a financial calculation from day one, it is logically impossible for her to initiate a divorce now. And it is even more impossible for her to return the equity stake. The two actions are in absolute logical contradiction. Luke finally caught his breath, downed a glass of water, and stepped back into the conversation to add his final assessment. Exactly. Chloe has never looked like a gold digger to anyone but you. The realization triggered a massive wave of self-doubt in Julian's mind. Did I truly miscalculate everything? By the time they exited the lounge, Julian had consumed 3 full bottles of heavy liquor and had to be physically supported by several staff members to be loaded into his vehicle. Dominic and Luke stood on the pavement with their arms crossed, watching the car pull away. It wasn't that they were unwilling to accompany him, they simply couldn't tolerate another hour of Julian continuously looping the exact same frantic question. Did she scheme against me or not? Meanwhile, at the Lowe family estate, Harper was currently playing host to a massive gathering of close friends and family. Today marked her birthday, and to ensure absolute freedom, she had chosen to host the gala inside her family's private mansion. Even though Chloe's internal state was deeply fractured, she had forced a warm, supportive smile onto her face and attended the event. The moment Harper spotted her best friend arriving, she immediately pulled her away from the main ballroom and guided her up to her private bedroom suite. The two girls reclined across a luxurious chaise lounge. Harper was holding a glass of Pinot Noir while happily tearing into some spicy snacks. Worried the spices would trigger a flare-up, Chloe picked up a knife and began delicately peeling a fresh pear for her. Chloe, sweetie, you are absolute perfection. I honestly believed you were going to skip tonight, Harper said. Chloe sliced a delicate piece of the fruit and popped it directly into Harper's mouth. How could I ever skip your birthday? Harper set her wine glass down on the vanity, shifting her posture to sit upright. So, what was the absolute final outcome with Julian? Did that bastard try to push you around? Chloe's hand holding the paring knife paused for a fraction of a second. Harper, he and I have mutually agreed to move forward with the divorce. Harper's eyes went wide with shock. Wait, for real? He actually signed off on it. Chloe offered a cold, detached smile. Yes, he agreed. No way, that's completely out of character for that corporate shark. How are the assets being split? Chloe handed the peeled pear to Harper. The divorce was my initiative. I am not taking a single dime from his estate. Harper's indignation hit the ceiling instantly. Are you insane? I'm telling you right now, don't leave the money. Who cares about pride? That heartless bastard subjected you to 2 years of domestic hell. You take every single cent you can get. Seeing her best friend get so passionately defensive on her behalf brought a genuine, warm smile to Chloe's face. She decided to tease her slightly. Harper, let me give you a piece of data. Grandpa Vance actually left me a 20% equity stake in Vance Enterprises. The moment the words left Chloe's lips, Harper practically leaped off the chaise lounge. What? Grandpa Vance left you 20% of the empire. Why on earth have you kept this hidden from me until now? Before Chloe could even offer a response, Harper began counting aggressively on her fingers, her massive eyes practically flashing with dollar signs. Oh my God. Chloe, my gorgeous billionaire best friend. That stake translates to tens of billions of dollars. Though the Lowe family belonged to the elite wealthy class, their entire corporate valuation hovered around a few billion. Seeing her friend's hilarious, money-hungry reaction, Chloe laughed softly. But as a condition for the divorce, I decided to execute a total return of those shares to the Vance family. Harper looked like she was about to suffer an absolute medical emergency, dramatically clutching her chest. Chloe, sweetie, do not commit financial suicide. Divorce the man, yes, but keep the capital. With that kind of net worth, you can literally spend the rest of your life lounging on a private island. Besides, that was a direct legacy left to you by Grandpa Vance. He cherished you deeply. Don't betray the old man's final act of love. Chloe had anticipated this exact reaction from her. Harper, returning the equity share was Julian's explicit condition for granting the dissolution. Harper slammed her hands onto her hips, her chest heaving with pure, unadulterated rage. A condition? On what authority does he get to dictate conditions? What right does that iceberg face possess to make demands? She turned her gaze back to Chloe, her voice vibrating with fury. For 2 long years, you endured his absolute cold shoulder and let high society whisper behind your back. He came back to the estate so rarely you could count the visits on one hand. Now that you're finally breaking free, he has the audacity to demand his pound of flesh? Julian Vance is an absolute bottom-tier piece of trash. Does he possess a shred of human decency left? Chloe, don't hold me back. I am going to drive over there and physically end him. Chloe quickly reached out, pulling her back down. She knew Harper inside out. Her friend was entirely capable of executing that threat. The sole reason she had chosen to share the reality of the shares in private was to prevent Harper from discovering it later and launching a full-scale corporate war against Julian on her behalf. Harper, thank you. But the reality is, I genuinely don't care about the equity. The personal funds Grandpa secured for me previously are more than enough to sustain my lifestyle. Right now, my only operational objective is to secure the divorce and cut all ties with him permanently. Harper felt an intense wave of sorrow for her friend, mixed with a lingering ache for the sacrificed billions. But prioritizing Chloe's psychological freedom over capital, she realized the money was secondary. She had witnessed too many high society alliances where the couples lived entirely separate, toxic lives purely to protect assets. Her best friend possessed a pure, authentic spirit that couldn't be bought or compromised by shallow materialism. Chloe, sweetie, if this is your absolute decision, you have my 100% backing. Chloe's eyes grew slightly misty. She quickly turned her head, attempting to conceal the emotional reaction. Harper immediately pulled a tissue from the box on the vanity and handed it over. Hey, no tearing up on my birthday. If you start crying, I'm going to start sobbing, and my makeup costs too much to ruin. Chloe let out a bright laugh, crumpled the tissue into a ball, and playfully hurled it at her. Knock, knock, knock. Can I come in, ladies? A deep, pleasant male voice drifted through the door. Harper walked over to unlock it, and a man wearing refined designer glasses stepped into the room, carrying 2 plates of perfectly seared Wagyu beef. I noticed you two hadn't stepped down to the ballroom yet. I figured you were starving, so I brought up a selection from the grill. Give it a taste. I handled the cooking personally. Tristan Lowe placed the plates elegantly on the vanity table before thoughtfully pulling 2 bottles of organic fruit juice from his jacket pockets. Thanks, Tristan. Chloe had spent years visiting the Lowe estate and maintained a highly comfortable, familial relationship with Harper's older brother, so she didn't stand on ceremony. Once Tristan exited the suite, Harper and Chloe began enjoying the steak. I have to admit, my brother's culinary skills are actually top tier, Harper noted, her eyes crinkling with absolute pride. Extremely impressive, Chloe agreed. Yet, as she chewed, a bittersweet memory triggered a faint ache in her heart. Before their marriage, Julian had also executed acts of care like this, gifting her luxury items, selecting her wardrobe, and taking her to exclusive dining spots. But the moment the marriage certificate was stamped, the reality shifted instantly, plunging her from a heaven of hope into an absolute hell of isolation. As her thoughts spiraled, she unconsciously drained the glass of Pinot Noir sitting on the table. Chloe, are you okay? Seeing the empty bottle, Harper realized the speed of her consumption. Fortunately, the alcohol content was low. Given Chloe's standard tolerance, it shouldn't trigger an issue. As the night deepened, the guests down in the ballroom began to disperse. Harper attempted to persuade Chloe to stay the night at the mansion, but Chloe declined. The divorce hadn't been processed legally. If a tabloid photographer captured her spending the night away from her residence during a high-profile marital dispute, it would generate a wave of toxic rumors. The Vance family name was already compromised enough. Seeing her logic, Harper didn't push. Suddenly, perhaps due to the highly chaotic mix of heavy spices and alcohol she had consumed throughout the night, Harper clutched her stomach as a sharp, sudden cramp flared up. She quickly pulled out her phone and dialed her brother. "Tristan, get up here right now." Her tone sounded physically strained. Tristan sensed the urgency and bolted up the stairs within seconds. "Harper, what's wrong?" "My stomach is absolutely killing me. I need to get to the bathroom right now. Can you please ensure Chloe gets safely back to her apartment?" Before she dashed into the restroom, Harper managed to fire the digital address pin directly to Tristan's device. Seeing that Chloe was slightly buzzed from the wine, Tristan readily accepted the task. Given that the current entertainment cycle was completely dominated by the Vance family drama, Chloe, as the reigning Mrs. Vance, was the absolute prime target for every paparazzi unit in the city. Though she had always maintained a flawless, dignified public presence that left photographers empty-handed for 2 years, Julian's recent live broadcast had turned her into a high-value asset. Multiple media units were actively tracking her coordinates. Perhaps due to the mild intoxication, Chloe's depth perception was slightly off. As she navigated the final step of the mansion's grand entrance, her foot caught the edge and she stumbled forward. Tristan moved instantly, catching her by the arm to prevent a severe ankle injury. To ensure she didn't exacerbate the strain, he carefully supported her weight as he guided her toward the passenger side of his vehicle. This exact 3-second interaction was captured by a paparazzi team that had been staked out in the bushes for hours. The photographers were practically ecstatic. After capturing a series of highly specific, distorted angles that manipulated the depth perspective, they packed up their heavy telephoto lenses and drove away, absolutely thrilled with their haul. Upon arriving safely at her penthouse, Chloe placed a brief call to her friend to report a safe transit. On the other end, Harper was practically gripping a towel in her bathroom, groaning in agony. "Chloe, sweetie, I am suffering from the absolute worst case of digestive karma right now." Hearing her dramatic, desperate voice, Chloe instantly recalled the mountain of spicy snacks from earlier. "Harper, go drink a bottle of kefir or yogurt to neutralize the spice." 2 minutes after hanging up the phone, Harper was sitting on the porcelain throne, frantically squeezing a yogurt pouch while wiping her brow. Aside from Harper's digestive crisis, everyone slept remarkably well that night. The following morning, the executive boardroom at Vance Enterprises. Julian was actively leading the monthly senior leadership alignment meeting. Midway through a financial brief, his personal phone began vibrating on the mahogany table. Normally, he would reject any interruption during an executive session, but the caller ID caused him to immediately freeze. He stood up and stepped out into the corridor to take the call. The moment the boardroom doors clicked shut, a senior VP inside let out a sharp gasp. "Look at the front-page entertainment digital tabloids right now." The executives, seeing that the CEO had cleared the room, immediately pulled out their personal devices. Within seconds, a wave of absolute shock rippled through the corporate suite. What on earth is going on? Why are the CEO and Mrs. Vance occupying two separate trending scandal headlines simultaneously? Look at the background metrics. These were shot at completely different coordinates last night. Good Lord, look at Julian. He's completely wasted, practically being poured into his vehicle by hotel staff. That's entirely out of character for him. Mrs. Vance looks like she's having a significantly better night. She's being delicately guided into a luxury vehicle. But wait, who is the guy holding her? They look remarkably close in this frame. What do you think happened between them last night? One is drinking himself into a blackout state, and the other is exiting a private estate with a handsome stranger. If you ask me, this is a direct retaliation to Julian's live broadcast from the other morning. He claimed his marriage was a trap. Looks like Mrs. Vance is validating his theory. Absolute nonsense. Chloe Vance is renowned throughout our social bracket for absolute dignity and grace. There is a 0% probability she would ever compromise her character like that. If that's the reality, why did Julian drink himself to that state? The man is a machine of absolute self-discipline. He never loses control unless he's deeply fractured. The senior executives, fully indulging in the high society drama, continued exchanging theories at a rapid pace. Suddenly, the boardroom doors were violently thrown open. Julian walked back in, his face masked in a terrifying, murderous shadow. Sensing the lethal aura radiating from the CEO, the entire room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. Today's session is concluded. We realign tomorrow morning. Without giving his executive team a fraction of a second to respond, Julian turned and strode out of the room with long, aggressive steps. Chloe had awoken late that morning. She had just finished freshening up and was preparing to sit down for breakfast when Harper's call blasted through the line. "We are dead, Chloe. We are absolutely dead. Have you opened the news media yet? Oh my God, this is entirely my fault. If my stomach hadn't short-circuited last night, I would have driven you home myself." Harper sounded entirely frantic. Chloe's mind was completely blank. "Harper, calm down. What news?" Realizing her best friend was still completely blind to the media explosion, Harper quickly delivered the context. "Chloe, remember how Tristan guided you to the car because you twisted your ankle? The paparazzi were staked out. They captured the interaction, and the tabloids are spinning a massive narrative about an intimate affair." Chloe set her breakfast down, calmly unlocking her phone to pull up the entertainment headlines. The moment her eyes locked onto the digital images, she pressed a hand to her forehead in pure disbelief. The manipulation of these frames is wild. In reality, Tristan had simply supported her elbow to keep her upright, yet through these specific camera angles, the depth perspective made it appear as though they were locked in a passionate embrace. Chloe reviewed the images, carefully reconstructing the memory. It was entirely a matter of camera distortion, but she had to credit the photographer. The angle choice was calculated genius. "It's fine, Harper. It's nothing but a deceptive camera angle. As long as the narrative doesn't match reality, we have nothing to fear," Chloe said, attempting to calm her friend to ensure she didn't consume herself with guilt. "Are you absolutely sure?" Harper pressed, her voice laced with anxiety. "Should I call that toxic iceberg husband of yours and give him the actual data?" Chloe swallowed a sip of her milk, her tone turning instantly cold. "There is zero necessity for that. My private life is no longer his operational business." After terminating the call, Chloe walked into the kitchen to wash her glass. She had just finished drying her hands when the apartment buzzer rang. Assuming it was the landscape delivery service, she had purchased a selection of indoor green plants the night before, and the vendor had promised a morning drop-off. She walked over to open the door. Julian stood on the threshold. The moment her eyes locked onto the man, Chloe's absolute instinct was to slam the door shut. "Chloe, what exactly do you think you're playing at?" Julian jammed his heavy palm against the solid door, utilizing his physical leverage to block her closure. Outmatched by his strength, Chloe turned on her heel and walked back into the living room. Julian strode inside after her. "Chloe, I demand an absolute explanation for this." Julian violently tossed a printout of the trending tabloid frames onto the marble console table. Chloe glanced at the images, entirely unbothered, and took a casual seat on the sofa. Witnessing her absolute lack of corporate panic or remorse, Julian's temper flared dangerously. "Chloe, we have not legally filed the dissolution papers. On what grounds do you think you have the liberty to engage in public intimacy with another man?" His choice of words was deliberately insulting. Chloe's temper flashed, and she stood up to confront him. "Are you blind, Julian? Do you not recognize Tristan Lowe? You know exactly what my relationship with that family is." Julian was momentarily silenced by the data point. He was well aware that Harper was Chloe's Ridiorti best friend, making Tristan essentially an older brother figure to her. Yet, the moment his eyes had locked onto those specific tabloid frames that morning, an intense, volatile wave of discomfort had flooded his chest. The nature of your relationship changes nothing. The baseline metric is that you were captured behaving with extreme intimacy in public last night. Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh, genuinely believing the man's cognitive functions had decayed. Still, she chose to deliver the actual timeline to eliminate the false accusation. "Last night was Harper's birthday gala. I consumed a fraction too much wine, and as I descended the entrance steps, I severely strained my ankle. Tristan was simply executing a basic act of chivalry by supporting my weight to the vehicle and ensuring I reached home safely." Julian's eyes remained narrowed in deep suspicion. If that was the reality, why wasn't Harper the one guiding you? And if it was a pure health issue, why does the frame indicate a physical embrace? Chloe found his relentless interrogation utterly exhausting. Harper faced an unexpected medical issue and couldn't leave the house. And Tristan never embraced me, he supported my elbow. The frames are a product of calculated paparazzi angles. Julian crossed his legs, leaning back against the sofa cushions, the skepticism on his face deepening. What kind of medical emergency could possibly prevent Harper from walking you to a car? Chloe never anticipated he would demand this level of micro-detail. Her expression shifted rapidly. While she wanted to establish her innocence, her personal loyalty to her best friend prevented her from broadcasting Harper's severe gastrointestinal crisis to an icy corporate executive. Seeing her hesitation, Julian let out a low, cold laugh. "Chloe, you can stop the processing. I have zero desire to listen to further fabrications. Let me remind you, until the legal documents are executed, you are legally my wife and the reigning Mrs. Vance. I suggest you practice some basic self-respect." Self-respect. The deployment of that specific word caused Chloe's rage to breach all boundaries. "Mr. Vance, what exactly are you implying?" "I have delivered the accurate data. It was a camera angle distortion. Furthermore, I have known Tristan for years. He is a trusted friend. Do not use your toxic tongue to corner me." Perhaps witnessing that Chloe was genuinely experiencing a severe emotional reaction, Julian's aggressive posture receded by a fraction. "I am not cornering anyone. I am simply issuing a strategic reminder. Until the divorce is finalized, maintain the dignity required of the Vance name." Hearing him loop back to corporate optics, Chloe's chest heaved with fury. "Get out." Right now, she couldn't tolerate spending another second in the same atmosphere as this man. Julian hadn't anticipated she would dare to evict him from the property. "We are legally married, Chloe. From a statutory standpoint, I possess equal rights to occupy this residence." The statement shattered the last remnants of Chloe's high society conditioning. Her elite upbringing screamed at her to maintain poise and avoid physical violence, but the sheer provocation was too much. She strode directly up to him and violently stamped her heel down onto his foot. One had to recall that the night before, when Julian was being poured into his vehicle in a blackout state, His foot had been caught and violently crushed by the heavy Maybach door. His instep was currently massively swollen and bruised. When Chloe's heel made direct, high-impact contact with that exact injury, a wave of blinding agony shot straight up his spine. "Chloe, you," Julian's face distorted in absolute agony, his hands instantly curling into white-knuckled fists. "Are you clearing the premises or not? If you remain, let's see if my next strike is significantly more damaging," Chloe threatened, raising her foot to simulate a second stamp. Blindsided by the physical pain, Julian didn't dare test her resolution. He threw her a venomous glare, turned, and limped out the door. Back in his vehicle, the driver navigated him back to his private penthouse. Luke and Dominic were already waiting at his doorstep. Having reviewed the morning headlines, they knew their brother would be in an absolute psychological crisis and had rushed over to manage the fallout, bringing a prescription topical ointment along. After all, they had witnessed his foot getting absolutely crushed by the Maybach door the night before. They had practically felt the phantom pain ripple through their own bodies. However, to protect his pride, they both intended to play completely blind to that detail. Julian unlocked the door, and the two friends quickly followed him inside. "Julian, where did you go?" "Your executive assistant stated you had returned home hours ago," Luke asked. Julian stripped off his sock to inspect the damage. The already swollen, bruised instep now featured a set of sharp, red structural marks that looked ready to break the skin. "That woman possesses a terrifying level of physical aggression." "What kind of woman?" Luke and Dominic's gazes locked onto Julian simultaneously, their minds immediately veering into a dark, scandalous territory. "Julian, what kind of woman could possibly do that to you? Don't tell me you went out and—" "Chloe," Julian spat out, his voice dropping into a dark register. Luke and Dominic instantly let out a massive, synchronized sigh of relief. They had genuinely feared Julian had lost his mind over the tabloid scandal and sought out a random distraction. "What is your operational objective here?" Julian asked, staring at his injured foot, his psychological state incredibly volatile. "Julian, we came over to tell you to look at the data calmly. The tabloid images regarding Chloe are definitely a product of media distortion," Luke said. "Exactly," Dominic chimed in. "As seasoned, I can instantly spot the calculated depth perspective. Do not misinterpret your wife's character." The two friends tag-teamed the defense strategy. Julian, however, remained cynical. "You honestly buy that?" The two friends nodded like bobbleheads. They had known Chloe for years. Her moral baseline and absolute integrity were metrics they trusted implicitly. Julian grabbed a sanitizing wipe, cleaned his hands, and hurled it into the bin. "She's occupied the role of Mrs. Vance for 2 years. Do you honestly believe she lacks the operational awareness to know that paparazzi track her movements?" Dominic and Luke exchanged a glance, unable to counter the logic. Julian continued, "If she possessed full awareness of active surveillance, why on earth would she engage in that level of physical proximity with another man in the dead of night?" Luke felt his friend's logic carried weight, his internal stance beginning to waver. Julian pulled up the trending tabloid frames on his phone, his face filled with pure disdain. If there were zero physical proximity to begin with, no amount of camera angling could manufacture a frame like this. While Luke nodded along, his cognitive gears shifting, Dominic maintained his absolute belief in Chloe's integrity. He was simply waiting for a secure transmission. The Tang corporate empire operated a premier elite internal intelligence and information collection division. Extracting the absolute reality of last night's events was an effortless operational task for them. A moment later, Dominic's device vibrated. He scanned the caller ID, stepped out onto the balcony, and accepted the data. When he returned to the living room, a video file had been successfully downloaded to his device. Dominic reviewed the footage, let out a massive sigh of relief, and directly handed the phone to Julian. Julian looked at him, his face filled with deep suspicion. Dominic didn't offer a verbal brief. He simply hit the play button. The raw surveillance footage ran for exactly 5 minutes. Within the frame, Chloe could be seen exiting the low mansion entrance, clearly limping heavily and struggling to maintain structural balance. Tristan Lowe, witnessing her physical distress, moved forward to steady her by the elbow. From their exit to the moment she was loaded into the vehicle, there was absolute zero intimate behavior. In fact, the footage clearly indicated a high degree of deliberate, professional boundary maintenance. Reviewing the absolute data, Luke felt a massive wave of social embarrassment hit him, his toes practically curling inside his designer shoes. He immediately cleared his throat, pivoting his stance seamlessly. "See? What did I tell you? I knew Chloe was entirely incapable of that behavior. It was nothing but a classic camera angle distortion." Julian felt a massive wave of intense social embarrassment wash over him as well, though he maintained his frozen, stoic mask. His eyes locked onto the medical ointment in Dominic's hand. "What's that?" Only then did the two friends remember their cover story. "Oh, this? It's a specialized ointment for your injury, Julian." Julian accepted the medication, reading the fine print on the instruction manual. His expression instantly locked up. "How on earth did you two know my foot was injured?" Luke and Dominic let out a highly awkward laugh. Damn it. They had optimized for the medical delivery, but entirely failed to manufacture a plausible source for the information. Witnessing their shifty, unnatural expressions, the fragments of Julian's hazy memories from the previous night began to realign. He successfully deduced the reality. "You two were there." Before he could finish the accusation, Luke violently pushed Dominic toward the entrance, both of them bolting out the door. A distant shout echoed down the hallway. "Get some rest, Julian. We'll touch base in a few days." After applying the topical ointment, the intense throbbing in his foot began to subside. With the physical pain managed, the reality of the raw surveillance video began to loop in his mind. He lay back on the sofa, tossing and turning in an absolute psychological crisis. In reality, when Chloe was delivering her explanation that morning, a part of his subconscious had already accepted her words as truth. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, a volatile wave of intense emotional discomfort had blocked him from acting rationally, causing his tone to turn sharp and aggressive. Now that the video had delivered absolute validation that she was entirely innocent, a profound sense of relief flooded his chest. Still, he realized he owed her a realignment after his performance that morning. Ignoring the lingering pain in his foot, Julian commanded his driver to navigate him right back to Chloe's apartment. The driver's mind went completely blank. What on earth is going on with the CEO? Didn't we literally just depart from that coordinate? Still, he kept his mouth tightly shut, executing the U-turn without a word. Harper's digestive crisis from the night before had been severe, and by morning, the toxic inflammation had triggered a noticeable breakout on her face. To protect her celebrity optics, she had forced Tristan to navigate her to a premier clinic at the crack of dawn. The physician had executed a full assessment and prescribed a heavy regimen of oral and topical medications. On their transit back, Harper commanded her brother to locate a premium florist. Tristan, assuming she wanted to purchase an arrangement for their own mansion, attempted to veto the detour. "Harper, the roses in the estate's private gardens are currently in full bloom. There's zero operational need to buy commercial inventory." Harper kept her gaze fixed out the window, her tone filled with exhaustion. "I'm purchasing these for Chloe, you straight-line thinker. Every time I visit her new place, I feel like the space lacks visual warmth." Tristan began decelerating the vehicle. "How about we head back to the estate and harvest a fresh custom bundle? They're significantly higher quality." Harper threw him a look of pure, unadulterated exasperation. "Tristan, gifting things to a girl requires absolute intentionality and curation. It needs to be sophisticated. Do you comprehend the word sophisticated?" Being thoroughly lectured by his younger sister left the elite heir feeling intensely self-conscious, and he didn't dare offer further resistance. Fortunately, a high-end boutique florist emerged just ahead. He located a premium parking spot and brought the vehicle to a halt. Given that Harper's lower back and glutes were still highly tender from her medical ordeal, she elected to remain in the passenger seat, issuing a highly specific set of aesthetic guidelines for Tristan to execute inside the shop. The boutique floral designer, assuming Tristan was purchasing a piece offering for a romantic partner, thoughtfully incorporated a delicate, blush-pink plush bear holding a heart into the center of the structure. Harper, worried Chloe might be away from the apartment, quickly placed a call. Chloe happened to be down at the complex's ground floor organic market. Learning that her best friend was en route, she promised to wait for them at the residential gates. Tristan spotted Chloe standing by the gates from a distance. Following his sister's explicit directive to avoid a public appearance due to her facial flare-up, he smoothly brought the car to the curb. Harper, exit. Chloe saw the vehicle pull up and immediately stepped forward to greet them. Harper offered a deeply tragic, strained smile through the glass. Chloe, sweetie, my lower back is in absolute agony, so I'm physically locked into this seat. Chloe stepped closer to the window, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. The medication hasn't kicked in yet? Is it serious? Harper gave her a brief rundown of her clinical visit. Chloe wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, but her personal loyalty deemed it highly inappropriate. All right, get some rest. Come over the second your body stabilizes. She assumed her friend had simply stopped by for a brief check-in, but Harper's face suddenly lit up with excitement. I brought you a housewarming piece. Chloe scanned the interior of the vehicle, seeing nothing but Harper. Harper lightly tapped the back of the driver's seat. Tristan, catching the cue, quickly exited the vehicle, walked to the trunk, and lifted a massive, meticulously structured floral arrangement. The arrangement was the absolute definition of luxury floral design, boasting a diverse, high-density selection of premium, vibrant flora that looked incredibly fresh. The outer perimeter was completely dominated by deep, crimson premium roses, looking intensely alive. Tristan extended the arrangement to Chloe. Chloe lowered her face, inhaling the deep, soothing fragrance. She looked at the siblings, offering a sincere, warm thank you. In reality, she felt deeply moved. Ever since her marriage, flowers had completely vanished from her life. Furthermore, the integration of the tiny pink plush bear in the center was incredibly charming, and she loved it. Recognizing the deep intentionality behind the gift, Chloe promised to host the two of them for a dinner in a few days. With the timeline pressing, the siblings prepared to head back to their estate, and Chloe turned to walk back into the residential complex, cradling the massive floral arrangement. Meanwhile, directly across the asphalt road, Julian's deep eyes were icy enough to freeze water into solid stone. His initial operational objective had been to issue a formal apology for his performance that morning, realizing he had heavily misinterpreted the tabloid images. Yet, witnessing this exact sequence play out right before his eyes made his entire approach look laughably foolish. Julian's long fingers slowly tightened into white-knuckled fists, an intense, volatile wave of friction consuming his chest. "Return to my penthouse," he commanded, his voice dripping with an absolute, lethal coldness that could sever air. The driver felt completely disoriented. Weren't we frantically rushing to catch her? Why on earth is he launching into a corporate freeze the moment he spots the young mistress? The driver had also witnessed the interaction, but from his specific visual angle, he had clearly spotted Harper sitting inside the vehicle as well. Still, as a driver, he understood that accessing family politics was outside his pay grade, so he simply jammed his foot onto the accelerator and executed the return loop. Chloe carefully arranged the corporate green plants that had arrived via courier, alongside the beautiful floral piece from her best friend, instantly injecting a layer of warm, domestic vitality into the penthouse. She brewed a pot of herbal tea and carried a porcelain cup out to the balcony. The sun was slowly dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking, intoxicating canvas of deep crimson and gold. She had been away from the Vance estate for several days now. Previously, within those walls, every single hour was packed with complex logistical operations and family management, leaving her zero breathing room. Now that her schedule had cleared entirely, a strange, hollow sense of stillness settled over her. Chloe finished her tea and was just about to head back inside when her phone on the table began vibrating. The caller ID displayed Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins was the elegant matriarch of the Higgins corporate dynasty, She was a woman of authentic sincerity and deep social grace, and she shared an exceptionally strong bond with Chloe. Whenever high society galas occurred, they traditionally navigated the rooms together. "My dear Mrs. Vance, please tell me you haven't overlooked tomorrow's annual grand charity auction." Hearing the title Mrs. Vance, Chloe's heart experienced a sudden, heavy drop, but she quickly reestablished her emotional equilibrium. "Of course not, Mrs. Higgins. I will see you tomorrow morning." This specific charity auction had been personally engineered and launched by Chloe exactly 1 week prior. The strategic design required elite high society figures to donate personal luxury assets to be auctioned off, with 100% of the proceeds flowing directly to premier metropolitan orphanages to optimize their winter wardrobe and nutritional logistics. Though she occupied the status of an adopted ward within the Vance family, from a functional standpoint, she was an absolute orphan. Her grandfather had disclosed early on that her biological parents had passed away during her infancy. She harbored a profound personal drive to utilize whatever leverage she possessed to ensure these vulnerable children received a significantly enhanced quality of life. Still, a trace of hesitation remained. She had just demanded a legal separation from Julian. Arriving at a high society gala still carrying the mantle of Mrs. Vance felt intensely hypocritical and socially awkward. Yet, the event had been locked into the calendar a week ago. If she executed a sudden cancellation now, the media would instantly weaponize the data to launch a wave of toxic marital speculation. "Fine. I will execute the attendance." Once the legal paperwork was finalized, she could step into absolute, permanent freedom. The following morning, Chloe finalized the inventory of the luxury assets she intended to donate. She selected a striking black sequin gown, a piece she had never once worn. The silhouette was high fashion, featuring delicate spaghetti straps that projected an aura of absolute royalty and classic elegance. With exactly 1 hour remaining before the red carpet opened, Chloe finished freshening up and began her own makeup. Previously, an elite glam squad would handle her styling operations, but since she had transitioned to the penthouse and refused to expose her new coordinates to the public, she elected to handle it autonomously. Fortunately, her features were naturally so striking and perfectly balanced that she required minimal correction to look absolutely breathtaking. During her tenure at the Vance estate, a private chauffeur would manage her transit logistics, but today she simply utilized a standard premium ride-sharing app. The venue was close, and the transit concluded within 20 minutes. The moment she stepped into the grand ballroom, a cohort of high society wives immediately swarmed her with intense enthusiasm. "Mrs. Vance, you look absolutely spectacular today." "Exactly. Not only is your poise unmatched, but that gown is an absolute masterpiece." "Bespoke haute couture, I assume?" "Without a doubt. Every single piece Mrs. Vance wears defines high fashion." Ha ha. The socialites unleashed a torrent of high-volume compliments. Even though the Vance family was currently navigating a heavy wave of negative tabloids, their massive market capitalization and economic influence remained absolute. Chloe maintained a practiced, graceful smile as she navigated the greetings before being pulled toward the absolute center of the front row VIP section by Mrs. Higgins. After a brief catch-up, the auction officially commenced. The first few donors presented their luxury assets, predominantly designer handbags and standard high jewelry. However, the price points remained relatively conservative. The motivation for these socialites wasn't pure charity. They were simply utilizing the inventory as a financial buy-in to secure social capital with Chloe, so nobody was surrendering authentic heirlooms. Only Mrs. Higgins and Chloe had approached the initiative with absolute sincerity. Mrs. Higgins donated a highly valuable, verified historical landscape painting from a master artist, commandingly raising the baseline metric. Chloe's personal donations consisted of elite high jewelry assets she had acquired post-marriage. She personally despised heavy ornamentation, and given the imminent divorce, she would no longer be navigating these high society rooms anyway. Keeping them locked in a safe carried zero operational utility, transforming them into actionable capital to execute real good for the orphanages was a far superior allocation of the assets. As the founder of the initiative, Chloe's donations were scheduled as the final anchor lots. The initial rounds concluded smoothly, though the bidding metrics remained standard. The real market competition triggered once Mrs. Higgins' historical painting hit the pedestal. 1 hour later, the final anchor lot was called. The auction staff carefully carried a stunning Hikarat ruby and diamond statement necklace onto the elevated stage. The eyes of every single socialite in the ballroom instantly locked onto the piece. While they all possessed ruby assets in their private collections, the saturation and clarity of this specific gem outperformed their inventory tenfold, and the diamond accents delivered an unparalleled level of brilliance. Absolute desire filled the room. In this bracket, the scale of your high jewelry was a direct metric of your husband's corporate leverage. After an aggressive sequence of bidding wars, the ruby necklace was successfully secured by a prominent corporate tycoon who publicly stated it was a gift for his wife, triggering a wave of intense envy across the room. Chloe had integrated 3 distinct high jewelry assets into the lot. Aside from the ruby piece, the remaining 2 items were an exceptional, ultra-rare imperial green jadeite pendant and a natural conch pearl bracelet. The imperial jadeite possessed flawless saturation and translucency, representing an asset with massive long-term investment valuation. Conch pearls, naturally, produced 0 standard cultivation metrics, making them an asset that capital alone couldn't easily secure. The moment these 2 assets hit the stage, the competitive drive of the socialites breached all boundaries. These were rare heirlooms that guaranteed massive asset appreciation over time. The auctioneer, detecting the intense shift in the room's energy, deliberately raised his volume through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next premier lot." Before the auctioneer could conclude his pitch, the heavy double doors of the ballroom were violently thrown open. Julian Vance walked inside, his face entirely devoid of emotion. He kept one hand casually slipped into his trousers pocket, his sharp features looking strikingly handsome under the gallery lights. Caleb followed precisely half a step behind him. The moment he entered the space, every high society woman straightens her posture, their faces flashing with unscripted fascination. Chloe hadn't anticipated his arrival. She had explicitly omitted his name from the invitation protocols. Furthermore, this was a relatively compact charity initiative. Historically, an asset of Julian's executive bracket wouldn't even deign to scan the brief for an event of this scale. Yet, since he had materialized, Chloe couldn't execute a public eviction. The media corps was actively filming, and creating a scene would trigger an absolute PR disaster. Chloe forced herself to step forward, initiating a standard greeting. Julian crossed his legs as he took his seat, completely ignoring her presence, his gaze fixed dead ahead. Chloe had no choice but to turn away and resume her seat, a flash of social awkwardness coloring her face. Witnessing the icy interaction, the surrounding socialites covered their mouths, launching into low-volume whispering campaigns. Chloe raised her hand, giving the auctioneer a silent cue to resume the timeline. The auctioneer caught the signal instantly, lifting his gavel to initiate the bidding for the new lot. The socialites aggressively drove the numbers up, determined to secure the rare heirlooms. Ultimately, a prominent matriarch managed to suppress the room by issuing a bid that sat at exactly 3 times the baseline reserve valuation, poised to close the lot. Yet, just as the auctioneer raised his gavel to finalize the drop, Julian abruptly stood up. "Deepest apologies to our guests tonight, but the assets currently presented by Mrs. Vance are hereby withdrawn from the auction block. Those items are the absolute property of the Vance corporate estate. She possesses 0 legal authority to liquidate them." The statement hit the ballroom like a physical shockwave, leaving every single attendee completely paralyzed. Mrs. Vance is the reigning matriarch of the family legacy. How could she possibly lack authorization? What exactly is the operational meaning behind CEO Vance's statement? Don't tell me the rumors regarding their split are true. Exactly. Remember his live broadcast interview from the other morning? They might have already executed the separation. No way. Elite families prioritize market optics above all else. They wouldn't drop a bomb like this in public. The corporate alliances and capital alignment are too deep. Nobody risks that over a personal dispute. The guests unleashed a torrent of low-volume speculation, every single word reaching Chloe's ears. She maintained her composure, using absolute willpower to suppress her emotional reaction as she turned her gaze onto Julian. Mr. Vance, tonight's charity initiative is actively generating highly positive PR metrics for the family name, which will easily neutralize our recent tabloid exposure. I suggest you do not complicate the proceedings. Chloe was fully aware that if Julian insisted on executing a corporate intervention, not only would the orphanages lose the capital, but their public confrontation would occupy the absolute top trending headline by tomorrow morning. The Vance family name would be dragged through another devastating storm. Julian met her gaze, his eyes dripping with pure, unadulterated sarcasm. Did I suffer an auditory error? Miss Lynn is suddenly highly invested in optimizing the Vance family's PR metrics. He unscrewed the cap of a water bottle, taking a slow sip. Miss Lynn possesses an exceptionally complex strategic mind. First, you land on the front-page tabloids locked in an embrace with another man, and now you're utilizing Vance family assets to play the grand philanthropist to fix your own optics. He set the bottle down with a cold smirk. Chloe, your acting capability is absolute genius. It's a genuine tragedy you didn't pursue Hollywood. You're wasted in corporate rooms. Hearing his words, Chloe's hands began to physically tremble with rage. The man was completely unhinged. She had already delivered the absolute data regarding the distorted paparazzi angles, yet he chose this exact high-profile room to weaponize it against her. Did he possess zero concern for his own family's legacy? Scanning the room, she saw the socialites actively documenting the drama, while the media personnel were frantically adjusting their lenses. Chloe made an absolute, high-risk executive decision. She reached up, unlatching the imperial green jadeite necklace resting against her collarbones, her absolute favorite asset, a priceless heirloom personally gifted to her by Grandpa Vance for her 20th birthday. She refused to let tonight's charity turn into a public circus for the Vance name, and she absolutely refused to let her grandfather's legacy take damage due to her private war with Julian. That empire was the product of her grandfather's life work, and it was the sanctuary where she had been raised. Chloe stood up, stepping confidently onto the elevated stage, and smoothly took the microphone from the auctioneer's hand. Distinguished guests, my apologies for the administrative confusion. The previous assets were indeed acquired under our corporate house accounts, and from a strict statutory standpoint, I choose to withdraw them from the block. However, she held the imperial green jadeite necklace high above her head, the gemstone catching the gallery lights. This specific imperial jadeite necklace was a direct, personal birthday gift from the late patriarch, Arthur Vance. It is my absolute private property, and I possess total legal autonomy to liquidate it. We open the bidding now. The corporate tycoons and socialites in the room had never witnessed a piece of jadeite of this absolute, museum-grade caliber. The room instantly shifted into frantic calculations, everyone assessing if their active rolling capital was sufficient to enter the bracket. Down in the front row, Julian's grip on his water bottle was so intense the plastic was practically imploding. Caleb quickly leaned in, whispering a warning, causing the CEO to slowly loosen his fingers. His initial operational objective had been to publicly humiliate Chloe to neutralize the frustration he felt from the flower delivery he witnessed the day before. Yet, he never anticipated she would possess this level of raw executive grit, directly surrendering a priceless personal heirloom to protect the timeline. She was throwing away a museum-grade treasure purely to sustain a charity drive. Julian's expression grew progressively darker as the numbers rapidly breached the $10 million threshold. His eyes narrowed, and he gave his assistant a silent, sharp hand gesture. Caleb caught the cue instantly, raising his paddle to double the active bid in a single movement. Hearing the front-row executive entering the war, the ballroom's cognitive functions completely short-circuited. What on earth is the Vance family playing at? The wife surrenders her private heirloom for charity, and the husband deploys his capital to buy it back? Are they utilizing a high society gala to play a private game of financial tag? Why don't they just write a direct corporate check and spare everyone the theatrics? Still, the attendees kept their thoughts confined to private murmurs, treating the sequence as an exceptional piece of high society entertainment. The gavel dropped. The imperial green jadeite necklace was successfully secured by Julian Vance. The moment the piece was delivered to his section, Julian carefully placed the heirloom into his suit pocket. Chloe saw the transaction conclude, and her racing heart finally stabilized. Even though she had lost her grandfather's prized gift, she had successfully prevented the Vance name from taking damage tonight. The sacrifice was operationally sound. With the auction wrapped up, a grand cocktail reception commenced. Julian, having secured the asset, immediately exited the venue with Caleb. Chloe, as the primary host, remained behind to manage her guests. Though the socialites had clearly decoded the heavy friction between the couple, the baseline reality remained. Chloe was still legally the reigning Mrs. Vance. As long as that corporate title was active, she possessed immense social and economic leverage, and keeping an open line of communication with her carried high utility. The women continuously stepped forward to toast her, their language filled with the standard, high society adulation. Right as the reception was entering its final hour, a young woman burst into the ballroom. It was Tiffany Vance. She was wearing a powder blue designer cocktail dress, an exclusive, limited edition handbag clutched in her hand. She completely ignored Chloe's presence, her head turning aggressively as she scanned the room for someone else. A cohort of younger socialites, recognizing her family's massive leverage, immediately stepped forward to greet her. "Good evening, Miss Vance." Tiffany didn't deign to offer a response, her neck straining as she checked the corners of the room. Failing to locate her target, she violently pulled a passing server aside by the arm. "Where is Julian?" The server glanced reflexively toward Chloe, who was actively engaged in a conversation nearby, before responding respectfully. "CEO Vance exited the venue exactly 1 hour ago, Miss Vance." "He left." A wave of profound frustration washed over Tiffany's face. Following their massive fallout at the estate, Victoria had locked her in her quarters, forbidding any exit and arranging logistics to ship her off to an international university for permanent exile. Tiffany had refused to comply, launching into a series of massive domestic tantrums. She sought to locate Julian, hoping her older brother would override their mother's executive order on her behalf. However, Julian had blocked her calls. She had then targeted Caleb, who disclosed that they were attending a private charity gala tonight. Tiffany had broken out of the estate without a second thought, racing directly to the coordinates. She had meticulously done her makeup and styling before leaving to protect her image, but discovering Chloe here triggered an intense wave of bitterness in her chest. The grounding, the international exile, every single crisis in her life right now was a direct result of Chloe. She harbored an absolute hatred for her. Still, she possessed enough tactical sense to know that launching a full-scale public attack in a room of this caliber was dangerous. Her parents always protected Chloe, and technically, Chloe still held the title of Mrs. Vance. Yet, having made the transit, leaving without delivering a strike felt completely unacceptable. Tiffany grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray, walked directly up to Chloe, and delivered a sharp, drippingly sarcastic greeting. "Good evening, sister-in-law." Chloe was surprised to see her. "Tiffany? When did you get back into the city?" Tiffany offered zero data, simply swirling the amber liquid in her glass. Chloe scanned the champagne, her brows knitting slightly. "Tiffany, that selection carries a highly concentrated alcohol metric. You should pace yourself." Back at the estate, Chloe had always maintained a highly supportive, maternal approach with her, completely overlooking her toxic attitude because she was Grandpa Vance's biological granddaughter. However, to Tiffany's eyes, Chloe's grace was nothing but a soft, easily exploitable vulnerability. She took a massive gulp of the champagne, a mocking smile spreading across her face. "Does my sister-in-law's palate possess an operational defect? You categorize this as heavy liquor." During her clubbing circuits with her socialite friends, She routinely consumed options with far higher metrics. Chloe wanted to explain that the specific vintage possessed a massive delayed onset, but Tiffany didn't give her the chance, draining the remaining contents in a single swallow. Chloe knew her sister-in-law had a decent tolerance, but tonight's selection was engineered to hit the system hard. A single high-velocity consumption would guarantee intoxication. "Tiffany, go sit down in the lounge wing for a moment. I'll coordinate a driver to navigate you back to the estate." The surrounding socialites, witnessing Tiffany's high-velocity consumption, began to voice concern as well. "Exactly, Miss Vance. That specific selection carries a heavy delayed impact. None of us dare to drink it at that pace. Perhaps it's best to return home and rest, Miss Vance. The reception is winding down anyway." Chloe pulled out her device, prepared to initiate the ride protocol. Tiffany, however, crossed her arms, leaning back as she looked at her with pure disdain. "Drop the performative care, Chloe. Whether I lose my sobriety or not is completely outside your jurisdiction. Besides, you've already packed your bags and cleared out of the estate. Whether you'll even hold the title of my sister-in-law by next week is a highly volatile variable." The statement hit the circle like a physical detonation. Every single socialite nearby turned their head, their gazes locking onto Chloe with absolute intensity. "Cleared out of the Vance estate? What kind of market signal is this? Are the rumors of a total corporate divorce officially verified?" High society socialites were the absolute definition of fair-weather allies. The moment Tiffany leaked the data, their internal asset calculators began recalibrating. If Chloe lost the shield of the Vance empire, spending time maintaining a connection with her was a total waste of corporate resources. "Mrs. Vance, is Miss Vance's statement accurate? Have you genuinely cleared out of the family estate?" Chloe knew the truth could no longer be contained. Given the exceptional networking and investigative capabilities of these high society gossip circles, any attempt to issue a denial tonight would simply result in them deploying private investigators to verify the penthouse coordinates by tomorrow morning. Chloe slowly nodded, confirming the metric. Witnessing the confirmation, the socialites immediately checked their watches, manufacturing a series of urgent domestic excuses to clear the room. Mrs. Higgins, however, remained by her side. She set her glass down onto the high-top table, gently guiding Chloe toward a quiet alcove. "Chloe, sweetie, is the data accurate? Have you genuinely walked away from the Vance estate?" Knowing Mrs. Higgins' authentic character, Chloe delivered a firm, unwavering nod. Mrs. Higgins struggled to process the reality, though she knew Chloe never committed perjury regarding personal metrics. "Then your current standing with the Vance family legacy." She wanted to ask what the legal and economic architecture of her relationship with the empire looked like now, but stopped herself, fearing it was too intrusive. Chloe looked out over the emptying ballroom, fully aware that the Vance family name was about to face the absolute most volatile media cycle in its history. To be continued. The next chapter promises even higher corporate stakes and dramatic confrontations.